Chapter 261. It was almost the Qingming festival, and it had been raining for days. The rain in the capital had washed the ground clean, and everywhere was lush with life. It had been more than a month since Wei's soldiers left the capital. Jiuquan was an endless desert. Lady He, the young deputy general, walked into the tent and said to the female official who was drawing on the ground, "I have already instructed them to reduce the number of camps." He smiled. "Thank you." The deputy general looked at the woman in front of him and felt a little emotional. When the Fuyue army that followed General Fei Hong found out that the leader was a young woman, they were unwilling. They could not be blamed for being picky. After following General Fei Hong of Wei, they could not help but compare themselves to other generals. Hien, as a woman, daring to go on the battlefield was admirable. However, in reality, she had never led an army on her own before, and they did not know how skilled she was. Even though she had won the battle against Jiang in the Rendezvous, she had the right army's commander-in-chief with her. Now, she was alone. Fighting a war was different from a simple martial arts competition. Emperor Zhaokong did this because he was the right army's commander-in-chief. However, within the Fuyue army, they were not truly convinced. In this month, they had only arrived near Jiuquan. Jiuquan was originally a city in the desert, and it was now occupied by Yudo. When Hien arrived at Jiuquan, she was not in a hurry to attack. Instead, she set up camp near Jiuquan. For the next few days, the soldiers had already started to complain. However, the deputy general knew that things were not as they seemed. He had been in the Fuyue army before, and although he did not have close contact with General Fei Hong, he knew that General Fei Hong dared to take risks. The woman in front of him had not shown her valiant side, but she was more rational and calm. The location of the camp was chosen just right. This location could be used to attack and defend. If there was any movement, it would be easier for them to adjust and retreat. The deputy general was puzzled. He had heard that this was Yian's first time in Jiuquan, but he seemed to be very familiar with the terrain and had a lot of experience in surviving in the desert. Of course, he had no idea that Hien was General Fei Hong in the past, and that General Fei Hong had first joined the Fuyue army to fight against the Western Chang people in Mo County. Mo County was not far from Jiuquan, and the terrain was similar. "Sir," the deputy general's gaze fell on the long scroll in front of Hien. "Are you drawing a map? These Yudo troops are abundant, and they have been plotting for a long time. Although the Fuyue army trains every day, they haven't been on the battlefield for several years. In addition, they suffered heavy losses in the Battle of Huayuan, so their troops are inferior to their opponents. I can't rashly attack and disregard the lives of these soldiers. Before this, know yourself and know your enemy, and you will never be defeated." Every day, she asked Shi Tu, Wang Ba, and the others to scout around Jiuquan City from afar. They didn't have to go too close, and after they were familiar with the terrain, she would go deeper. After a few days, she finally drew a complete map. With this map, the Fuyue army, which was originally inferior to the Yudo in terms of numbers, would be able to unleash their full potential. However, Hien sighed in her heart. She knew that the Yudo had rested for many years and would definitely have abundant military equipment. However, when she arrived in Jiuquan, she realized that the Yudo's troops were much stronger than she had imagined. If it was only Jiuquan, it would be fine. If the other three places were also like this battle for the Wei would be really difficult. For so many years, Emperor Wenxian valued the civil and despised the military. The Wei's troops had stagnated, and the Yudo had gained the upper hand. It seemed that the Huayuan, Rendezvous, and even Jiang were all just a pretense. The Yudo didn't show their true military strength. Their goal was to make them lower their guard. That made sense. If it wasn't for that, how could these 4 cities have fallen so quickly? "My lord, you have to take care of your health." The deputy general thought for a while and reminded her, "My lord, you haven't slept much these few days. It's fine. I know what to do." Hien continued without raising her head. Seeing her like this, the deputy general didn't say anything else. He bowed and left. After he left, someone called from outside, "My lord, Hien, come in." "Jiang Jiao," and Sure too came in. Like the other soldiers, they called Ian my lord he. After all, Ian hadn't been made a general yet. But in private, they still liked to call Ian brother he. The two of them were careful and steady in their work. In the current Fuyue army, Hirufe had single-handedly wiped out the elites. There weren't many people who could be trusted. Ian left some important matters to Sure too and the others. She raised her head and looked at the two people who were approaching her. She asked, "Did you find any movement from Yudo?" Jiang Jiao replied, "There was a group of Yudo that went out of the city last night to scout, but they didn't come close to our tent. They only looked around and left. We followed Brother He's instructions and didn't chase after them. But in the past 2 days, there hasn't been any movement." He asked, "Brother He, do we continue to wait?" "Wait," Hien said in a low voice. "We won't take the initiative to attack the city. We'll let them chase after us." "Lure the enemy?" Jiang Jiao was startled. "But if they really take the initiative to attack us, won't we be at a disadvantage? After all, the Yudo have more soldiers than we do." "Don't worry," Hien smiled. "Those Yudo are cunning and suspicious. That definitely won't let all of their soldiers leave the city. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to camp here for so many days and still be safe and sound. They sent scouts out at night to scout the situation. It's nothing more than trying to find out more about us." Hien stood up and walked to the wooden tray in the tent. There were many small hills piled up with sand. Next to the hills were marks made with grains of rice. She picked up a branch and pointed at it for the two people to see. "Moreover, the place where we're camping is a gorge. The Yudo are afraid that we'll set up an ambush on the road behind us. Of course, they won't dare to act rashly. Previously, I fought with the Yudo in Jiang and Rundu. If Maka and Hwayat's people sent word back to the Yudo leader of Jochuan should have heard of my name. But he can't be sure if I can really lead troops. He looks down on me, but because of what happened in Rundu and Jiang, he doesn't dare to look down on me. Guess what he'll do?" "Do what?" Jiang Jiao didn't understand. "He'll find a way to prove that I'm not capable. After he finds evidence, he'll look down on me with reason." Hien smiled. "Although I don't quite understand why the Yudo's generals are always like this, since they want to see a woman who only has a name but doesn't actually know how to lead troops, then I'll show them what they want to see." So, Sure too, who had been silent all this time, suddenly brightened up. "Those military camps. If we camp here for a few days and don't make any moves, the Yudo will suspect that we're up to something, so they'll send troops out to investigate at night. If I were the Yudo, I'd definitely think that it must be because the other side's leader is a woman. My subordinates aren't convinced, and they're afraid of the Yudo soldiers in Jochuan. So many of them deserted. That's why they underestimated the enemy. When they let down their guard and lead their troops deeper in, then we can set up an ambush." Jiang Jiao was excited at first, but then he thought of something and said hesitantly, "But brother, didn't you say that the Yudo is cunning and suspicious, so they definitely won't send all their troops out of the city?" "Yes," Hien looked at him. "So the troops they've sent out should only be a portion. What we need to annihilate is also only this portion. If they really dare to attack with all their troops, we'll be at a disadvantage. Haven't you thought of wiping them out in one fell swoop?" Sure too was a little confused. Hien patted his shoulder. "You haven't been to a real battlefield, so you don't know that a real war can't be ended overnight. The Yudo are much better than us in terms of troops, so we shouldn't use our weakness to attack their strength. I never planned to fight them head-on. Luring them deep in and wiping out a portion of the enemy's troops will be enough to damage the morale of the Yudo. After that, we'll slowly plan our next move. If you want to win a war, you must be patient and calm. Only then can you walk to the end." Hien smiled. "This is just the beginning." Jiang Jiao and Stone looked at the armored woman in front of them. In the past, when they were in the Liang province guards, they already knew that her skills were exceptional and her wisdom was unparalleled. However, now that she stood here, leading an army, unhurriedly spreading out a net, only then did they slowly and truly understand her abilities. "Brother He," Jiang Jiao joked, "you've only participated in the Battle of Jiang once more than us. Why do you seem so familiar with it?" "That's not the same." The woman's lips curled up. "I I was born to fight. A gust of wind blew from outside, causing yellow sand to fly everywhere in the desert. As the banners fluttered in the wind, the atmosphere became even more desolate. Shirt 2 muttered, G County isn't far from here. I wonder how General Yin is doing? G County. Yan's gaze became heavy. He heard that the plague there had already spread. Piles of corpses were piled up in the fields outside the city and beside the river. A group of soldiers was digging a very deep hole. Looking inside, one could see corpses wrapped in white cloth. They were already emitting a rotten smell. At first glance, it looked like hell on earth. There was a hut made of straw, and the ground was covered with coarse cloth. Dozens of people were lying flat on the ground. These people were dying, and their bodies showed signs of festering. A young man was brewing medicine at the side, stirring the herbs in the giant vat with a large metal ladle. His body was not very strong. It was already very strenuous for him to stir the medicinal herbs in this huge vat. Not long after, beads of sweat had already seeped out of his forehead. However, from the beginning to the end, he did not have any intention of slacking off. His snow-white robes had long been soaked in mud and blood. His hand, which had always held a folding fan, was now either holding silver needles to treat illnesses or a bowl of life-saving medicine. The plague in G County was more serious than expected. After the Udo took over G County, they massacred civilians and abducted women. A large number of corpses were casually thrown into the river. It was also spring, and the plague soon broke out. The Udo directly chased out all the Dawei civilians who were still alive, leaving them to fend for themselves. When Lin Shuanghe and Yin He arrived at Ji County, the fields outside the city were filled with corpses. Lin Shuanghe thought that as a doctor, he was used to seeing death. However, when he first arrived, he could not help but be shocked by the tragedy. Yin He's troops were used to deal with the Udo. There were not many military doctors here. He was the grandson of Lin Shuanghe. Originally, everyone advised him not to personally come into contact with these sick people if he was infected by the plague. However, Lin Shuanghe did not listen to these kind of advice. If he was afraid of death, he would not have chosen to come here in the first place. The dead civilians could not be buried on the spot. They could only be cremated. After turning into white bones, they were buried in a deep pit. This was already the best method. Even so, they could still hear the cries of their family members who were still alive every day. He scooped the medicinal soup into a broken bowl and left it to dry. When it was slightly cooler, he brought it to the straw shed and fed it to the patients. He was originally a very particular young master. He always had some vanity. Even when he treated female patients in Shuo City, he would smile brightly when he saw cute and well-dressed women. But now, the patients here had a strange smell on them. They were dirty and hideous, but he did not dislike them at all. The patient that Lin Shuanghe helped up was a woman. She should still be very young. Her appearance was average, even a little too plump. Lin Shuanghe scooped up a spoonful of medicinal soup and brought it to her lips. She carefully drank it. Looking at the gentle and handsome young master in front of her, she blushed slightly. Even the pain in her body seemed to lessen. Dr. Lin, I can do it myself, she said in a small voice. That won't do, Lin Shuanghe said sternly. How can I let a beautiful lady drink the medicine herself? I am a gentleman who has tender feelings for the fairer sex. The patients in the straw shed heard this and smiled kindly. This Dr. Lin was good-looking and had a good temperament. He was different from the stern and fierce general. He was always smiling. He was also in the mood to joke with everyone. He talked about everything under the sky, even though they might not be able to see the next morning. Even though it was such a tense and sad moment, his attitude never changed. Therefore, with him around, the atmosphere was much more relaxed. It was as if nothing was different from before. It was as if when they woke up, G County would still be the same G County and everything would be solved. After feeding all the medicine in the straw shed to the patients, Lin Shuanghe told them to rest well. Only then did he pick up all the bowls. He rinsed the bowl of medicine with boiling water before stopping. He rubbed his shoulders and finally had the chance to examine himself. However, when he looked at the stains on his body, he stared blankly for a while before giving up. It was because the white robes he brought were all cut into cloth to bandage the wounds of the patients. Now this was the last piece of clothing. There were no other white robes to replace it. Lin Shuanghe walked to the other side. The soldiers that Yanhe brought had fought with the Yudo a few times. There were victories and defeats. The terrain outside Ji County City was complicated. The Yudo were in the city, and it was easy to defend. The battle was at a stalemate. Fortunately, Yanhe himself was not affected by this matter. He seemed to be in good spirits, and his morale was high. Moreover, the plague was now slightly under control. The panic did not continue to spread. Even though this battle would not be easy to win for the time being, things were moving in a good direction. In last night's surprise attack, Great Wei had won a small victory. There were many new wounded soldiers and some soldiers who died in battle. The soldiers who died in battle were buried on the spot. Lin Shuanghe let the other military doctors treat the wounded soldiers first. He himself took over the most dangerous plague patients. At this moment, he saw a few lightly injured soldiers sitting and talking by the river in front of the tent, and he was sitting on the ground, drinking water from his mouth without any care for his image. Lin Shuanghe dragged his tired feet and walked over. He spread his hands in front of Yanhe, and he was confused. He slapped his hand away. "What are you doing?" "General's Yin." Lin Shuanghe licked his lips. "I was busy treating the patients until now. You didn't even leave me a bowl of wild vegetable soup. I'm starving to death. You should at least give me something to eat." And he rolled his eyes at him. He took out a dry biscuit and threw it to him. "Eat, eat. You won't choke to death." If it was any other day, Lin Shuanghe would definitely argue with him. Today, he was really weak and hungry. He sat down and took a big bite of the biscuit. The biscuit was dry. When he swallowed it, it hurt his throat. The taste was not considered delicious. Lin Shuanghe really choked. Yanhe looked at him with disdain. He passed the water bottle in his hand to him. "Are you reincarnated from a hungry ghost?" Lin Shuanghe quickly took the water bottle and took a big gulp. After he swallowed the biscuit in his mouth, he said, "Big brother, I haven't eaten for the whole day. Being a prisoner is more than that. Not only do you not have any sympathy for me, you even scolded me. Are you human?" And he looked at the disheveled appearance of the person opposite him. He subconsciously wanted to say a few harsh words. However, when he saw his stained clothes, he swallowed the mocking words that were about to come out of his mouth. Forget it. To be honest, Lin Shuanghe's trip this time was really out of his expectations. Originally, Yanhe thought that even though Lin Shuanghe had been to the Liang Province Guard before, the Liang Province Guard did not fight a war. In any case, he lived in the guard station and did not have to suffer the hardships of the world. When he really arrived at Ji County, this pampered and spoiled young master would definitely cry to the heavens. He did not expect that from the beginning until now, Lin Shuanghe had not uttered a single word. Even though he did not draw his sword and soak in blood with those Yudo at the very front, taking care of those injured soldiers and comforting the civilians who were frightened by the plague was not an easy task. Moreover, it was very dangerous, and he snorted and did not reply. Lin Shuanghe took a few more bites of the biscuit and drank some water. The food and drink filled his stomach a little. He did not feel as uncomfortable and became spirited again. He looked at Yin Nanguang and said, "Yin Nanguang, I could be considered to have suffered greatly here. When we return to Shuo capital, you must truthfully report my contributions here to the emperor. In any case, I was given an official position. When have I ever suffered so much in my life? What kind of biscuit is, if it was me in the past, even my family's dog would not eat it." This person began to speak nonsense after coming back to life. Yanhe laughed coldly. "No one here is forcing you to eat it. Furthermore, I have not seen you suffer much. What time is it now? Yet you still have the mood to joke around with women. Lin Shuanghe, you really can't change your habit of womanizing wherever you go. Don't speak as if you are full of righteousness." Lin Shuanghe scolded him. "You have a wife and a child, but I am still single. How do I know which girl is destined to be with me? Naturally, I have to try. You have already hung yourself to death on a tree, yet you are jealous of others picking flowers and smelling grass. Are you crazy?" When Yanhe heard this, he was about to retort when a soldier passing by said in surprise, "General's Yin, you have a child?" Yin he glared at Lin Shuanghe. Lin Shuanghe coughed softly. Xia Qingxiu's pregnancy had not been announced to the public yet. However, now that someone had heard it, there was no reason for him to deny it. Yin he said, "He is not born yet. He is in my wife's womb." The soldier looked to be in his 30s. His face was dark, and he had a simple and honest appearance. Hearing this, he also sat down and scratched his head. "That's good. When the general returns from this battle, you'll be able to see the child, just like me in the past." "You?" Yin he asked. "You have a child?" "Nonsense." Lin Shuanghe could not help but say, "Do you think you're the only one in the world who could be a father?" The man scratched his head and smiled. "Yes, there are two. The older one is 3 years old, and the younger one is just 1 month old. When I return this time, I wanted to accompany my wife for a few more days, but I didn't expect the Yudo to come. I told my wife that when I return after the war and get my salary, I will make a silver necklace for my younger son. As for my older daughter, when I left, she cried so much that my heart was broken." Yin he had never been an approachable person. Because of his noble background and arrogant temperament, even when he interacted with his subordinates, he would always be a little arrogant. Today, because this man was also his father, it was rare for him to say a few more words. He asked, "Do you have a deep relationship with your daughter? You have been living in the military camp, and you don't go home often, right? How can she still be close to you?" Lin Shuanghe was puzzled. "Are you seeking the experience of your predecessors for the trouble you may encounter in the future?" And he scolded him, "Shut up." Then he looked at the man in front of him. "Tell me quickly." "This? I don't know either." The man was a little confused. "It's true that I don't go home often, but every time I go home, I remember to bring her favorite malt candy, buy her beautiful cloth, and ask my wife to make new clothes for her." General Yin, you don't have to worry. People say that daughters are all biological fathers. If your wife gives birth to a daughter, she will definitely be very close to you, General Yin. And he was elated by his words. But then his expression became serious. "What if it's a son? Isn't that better?" The man said, "The general can bring the young master with him. Father and son don't have to be separated on the battlefield." And he suddenly understood and looked at the person in front of him. "I didn't expect you to be so smart as a father." Lin Shuanghe was speechless when he heard this. After the man was praised by his superior, he laughed foolishly for a while. Suddenly, he became silent again. After a while, he sighed and said, "When my daughter left, she kept hugging my leg. I know that she was afraid that I would die on the battlefield. If," he looked at the sky far away, "I can go back alive, I will definitely buy her favorite candy cake." And he was stunned for a while. After a while, he also looked into the distance. The sky was dyed red by the setting sun. The setting sun was like blood, and the field was gentle and silent. "Don't worry," he said, "she will definitely eat the candy cake you bought." Chapter 262. The yellow sand stretched for thousands of miles, and the dark clouds hung low. The sandstorm kicked up dust as the two armies clashed. After the Dawei troops camped outside Jiuquan City for 5 days, the Yudo in the city could no longer hold back. The number of soldiers decreased by the day, and the marquises from Dawei never faced them head-on. Even the spies they sent out fought with the Dawei soldiers. When the Dawei soldiers reached the city gates, they did not dare to continue the chase. Ever since it was engraved in the Yudo's bones, the news that Maka and Huyate had sent back was treated as an excuse for their incompetence. A woman, who only had a bit of fame because of her husband, was nothing to be afraid of. Even the Dawei's own subordinates could not control her. In just 5 days, half of them had deserted. The Yudo leader was certain that the Dawei soldiers were afraid. That night, he ordered his elite troops to chase after the remaining Dawei troops. When the Yudo soldiers reached the outskirts of the city and walked towards the Gobi Desert, they suddenly heard the deafening sounds of fighting. The Dawei troops, who were lying in ambush on both sides, fired arrows at the same time. The arrows rained down like a storm, catching them off guard. Right at this moment, another group of cavalrymen charged over with sabers in their hands. The one in the lead was a young woman in red armor. Her eyes were sharp, and she held a pale sword in her hand. It was as if she wanted to cut through the sky. She was unrivaled as she rode on the wind. The two armies clashed, and the sound of drums filled the air. When the Fuyue army was taken in by General Fei Hong, they were like divine soldiers. No one could stop them. Ever since the real General Fei Hong left, they had not been able to hold their heads high like they were today. The frail and petite woman seemed to contain an enormous amount of power within her body. The Fuyue army was like the best blade in her hands. Her formations and ambushes were all exquisite. He crouched on the back of the horse. The long sword was like her arm. She charged into the enemy's camp without any fear. Wherever the long sword flew, blood sprayed, and the enemy's head was chopped off from the horse. Her smile lit up the gloomy night in the Gobi Desert. The Yudo was beaten to the point that they had to abandon their armor and flee. The last trace of blood on the long saber was wiped away, and the fierce battle was over. Yudo was either dead or captured. Although the city gate was not broken, the first battle could be considered victory. The deputy general excitedly found the woman who was walking back. Ignoring his tired body, he ran over and said, "My lord, this battle was won beautifully. My lord, you have a brilliant plan." Hien smiled. "It's not my doing." Her armor was full of bloodstains, and her face was also stained with blood. Perhaps it was not only Yudo's, but her posture was straight, and she did not look tired at all. Instead, her eyes were bright and full of energy. When the Fuyue army saw her, they felt relieved. It seemed that as long as she was here, they would definitely be the winner in this battle with the Yudo. In the army, strength and fists were the most important thing. If it was before, the Fuyue army still had some objections to Hien's leadership and did not understand why she ordered people to reduce the number of soldiers every day. But after this battle, she really won the hearts of the soldiers. Everyone could see the effectiveness of the ambush and the formation. She took the lead on the battlefield and led the soldiers. Her sword was awe-inspiring, and it was not fake. Perhaps, if the real General Fei Hong was here, he would also have the same style. Hien said, "Let the military doctors treat the injured brothers first. Those who are not injured, clean up the battlefield." She paused and said, "It's daybreak. We still have to attack the city." "Attack the city? It's only been one night. I'm afraid that the brothers..." Hien smiled and said, "It's not really attacking the city. It's just harassing them." Although this battle was won beautifully, it was not an easy victory. The army that was sent out was the elite of the Yudo. It was difficult for the Fuyue army to fight against them, but they still had the upper hand. And this was only the first step. Someone ran from behind and called out to her while panting, "Darren." Hien turned around and saw that it was Jiang Jiao. She asked, "What's wrong?" "Brother Sean." Jiang Jiao's face was very ugly. "You should go and take a look." Hong Shan's chest was pierced by the Yudo. After taking off his armor, his clothes were dyed red with blood. Wang Ba and the others surrounded Hien. The military doctor saw that Hien came over and shook his head. Hien walked over. This man who always patted her shoulder with a smile and called her he would never wake up. Hong Shan's skills were not the best among this group of people, but he always tried his best to keep up with everyone's pace. Hien still remembered that the first person she met when she joined the army was Hong Shan. This man treated her as his thin and weak younger brother and always took care of her. He also once said, "There's nothing wrong with being a soldier. At least you'll be alive." But now he died on the battlefield. He did not have any keepsakes on him, so there was nothing he could take away. Wang Ba, who always said a few words, did not say anything at this moment. His eyes were a little red. They were all brothers who went through a lot together, and their relationship was deeper than others. But the cruelty of war was that no one knew in advance who would be the next to leave forever, and she did not have the time and energy to grieve here. "Let's bury him," she said softly, stood up, and walked forward. Wang Ba couldn't help but say angrily, "Hey, that's it. Tidy up." The woman's voice was firm and clear, without any unnecessary sadness. At daybreak, attack the city. The city gates opened. Thousands of soldiers and horses were on the mausoleum path, war drums thundering. The young general in silver armor was like a nimble silver dragon in the night, his blade carrying a valiant coldness. Gui de Zhonglong's style of fighting was direct and fierce, pressing forward courageously. The Yin army under his command was the same. The two armies fought, leaving no way out. Although the plague in Ji County was severe, it was now under Lin Shuang's control. After a few small probing battles, the Yin army won a few more battles. Today, the city gates were finally breached. It was a true head-on battle. Perhaps it was because Yudo was more afraid of General Feng Yun than Yen He. Most of Yudo's soldiers were sent to Yunzi as reinforcements. The remaining soldiers in Ji County were not as many as the Yin army. Dewey temporarily had the upper hand. Winning a battle was the best way to raise morale. At this moment, the Yin army's morale was at its peak. The surrounding soldiers shouted, "Kill Yudo and get them out of the way! Get out of the way!" Some people laughed and shouted, "After this battle, maybe we will be the first to return to Shuajing." The people who said these words liked to hear them. Everyone knew that Generals Yin loved to compete with General Feng Yin. If they won this battle and returned to Shuajing first, wouldn't that mean that their general was stronger than military Governor Xiao? And he also felt good when he heard this. At this moment, he saw the Dewei soldiers fighting Yudo in front of him. They looked familiar. He immediately remembered that this was the man who had told him about his child a few days ago. And he still remembered that this man's daughter was only 3 years old. At this moment, he was fighting Yudo with all his might and did not see the arrow flying from behind him. And he frowned. He could not be distracted on the battlefield. Perhaps it was the man's desire to return home that left a deep impression. Or perhaps it was the little girl waiting for her father to bring back Tang Wei. It made Yin He think of the unborn child in Xia Chengxiu's womb. In any case, he flew over and pushed the man away. The arrow brushed past their hair, and he heaved a sigh of relief. At this moment, he heard the panic cry of someone beside him. "General!" Yunzi was close to the sea. Tongji County and Jiuchuan were in two completely opposite directions. The night was as dark as ink. The sound of waves hitting the rocks could be heard from ashore. The wind blew the damp smell of the sea. Looking from ashore, the sea and the sky were one. It was like taking a boat out to sea. If one kept going forward, one would reach the 9 heavens. If there was no war, the scenery here would be beautiful. However, once there was war, the vast and distant became desolate and cold. Torches could be seen in the tent. A young man in black armor was looking at the map on the sand table in deep thought. Someone walked in from outside and said, "Young master, the people you ordered to pass by the city gate with the rice loads have been arranged." Xiao Zhu nodded. Good. Dewei had 2 famous generals. In the eyes of the Yudo, General Fei Hong was no longer around. The only one left who was difficult to deal with was General Feng Yin. Therefore, Yunzi had the most Yudo soldiers. However, after Xiao Zhu led the southern prefecture soldiers to Yunzi, the Yudo did not fight him head-on. Perhaps it was because in the past few years, the Yudo had suffered a lot at the hands of Xiao Zhu. Or perhaps they had credited Xiao Zhu for the victory of Dewei in the battle between the Rundu and Jiang. This time they would not act rashly. Therefore, the city gate was closed, and they vowed not to leave the city. Fei Nu looked at the young man sitting in front of the table. "Young master, these Yudo have been unwilling to make a move because they want to wear down the southern prefecture soldiers. Although the southern prefecture soldiers and the 9 Flags Battalion soldiers will not be afraid, because of this, they will not have enough food as time goes by. This was the most important thing to consider. That's what they're planning," Xiao Zhu said. However, he twitched the corner of his mouth and his eyes were cold. The Yudo arrived at Yunzi before the southern prefecture soldiers. Even if there is food in the city, they have more people. The food in the city will not last long. They want to wear us down? The young man's smile was mocking. They will wear us down. The Yudo wanted to wait until the southern prefecture soldiers were starving and had low morale before they attacked. However, as time went by, the southern prefecture soldiers would not be the only ones worn down. The Yudo soldiers would also face the same predicament. So, young master purposely let them carry the rice through the city gate for the Yudo to see. Let them know that Dewei has enough food. Let's see how long they can last. Fei Nu lowered his head and said, "Young master is wise." Xiao Zhu put down the short stick that he used to point out the map and walked out of the tent. There was no moon outside. The patrolling soldiers walked around with torches in their hands. There were also soldiers who sat together and ate their rations. When they saw Xiao Zhu, they greeted him politely. The Southern Prefecture soldiers and the Nine Flags Battalion were brought up by Xiao Zhu, especially the Nine Flags Battalion. It was different from the Liangzhou Guards and the Fuyue Army. The soldiers were not too close to their superiors. It was not that they were cold-hearted. It was because the right army commander had a cold personality and was very strict about military discipline. The women only saw the good looks of the jade-faced army commander, but the people in the barracks knew that under his good looks was the heart of the king of hell. As a result, the Southern Mansion Army didn't even hear a single joke. Xiao Zhu walked past the tent. A soldier poked Chi Wu, who was beside him, and whispered, "Chi Wu, what is that hanging on the army commander's waist? Is it a sachet? Why is there such an ugly thing hanging on his waist?" Chi Wu was speechless. In any case, Xiao Zhu was one of the most handsome men in the Great Way. Even if he was wearing armor, he would still be able to wear it in a particularly heroic and elegant manner. However, this time, when he was deployed, the accessory on his waist had become a fragrant sachet. It was unknown what it was embroidered with, but this thing was really too conspicuous, making it difficult for people to ignore. The soldiers did not dare to ask. Finally, a brave soldier could not hold himself back and asked Xiao Zhu's personal subordinate, Chi Wu. "That's right. Chi Wu, what is that?" Someone else asked. "I see that the army commander keeps it on his body every day. It seems like he treasures it a lot. Where did it come from?" Chi Wu waved his hand. "That was embroidered by the young mistress for the young master." "What do you know?" "Young mistress?" The soldiers who gathered around looked at each other. The one who spoke first smiled awkwardly. "The young mistress's needlework is really special. It is quite special." Someone nodded and said, "The army commander wears such a special sachet on his body every day." "Chi Wu, I heard that the army commander dotes on the young mistress very much. Is that true?" "That's impossible. When have you seen the army commander dote on anyone? Can you imagine?" "I can't." Chi Wu was annoyed by the questions. He stood up and pointed at them as he lectured. "Do your night duty properly. What are you thinking about every day? Do you have a wife? Why are you so concerned about others? Be careful that the young master will punish you if he hears this." When he stood up, someone saw the boots on his feet and asked curiously, Chi Wu, your boots are quite special. Why is there a flower embroidered on it?" What? There's no flower." "Wow, there's really a flower. This must be embroidered by a lady." "Chi Wu, when did you have a sweetheart? Why didn't you tell us? You're not loyal enough." "What sweetheart?" Chi Wu's face turned red. He scolded, "Don't talk nonsense." He turned and left. Xiao Zhu walked to the shore. The shore was illuminated by the torches, reflecting the sparkling waves on the water. The night without the moonlight was somewhat chilly. He reached out and untied the sachet on his waist. On the sachet, the crooked moon was looking at him. It was as if he could see through the poor needlework and see the bright smile of the owner. The young man stared at the sachet in his hand, the corners of his mouth slightly curved. Zhou Chuan and Yunzi were too far away. It would take a long time for the news to reach here. He didn't know how her situation was, but she should be able to handle it. He raised his eyes to look at the horizon. The sea was endless. Only the sound of the waves could be heard. It was like the ravings of a lover's dream, scattered little by little in the night of the battlefield. Shuajing. The wind in the night blew open the window that was not closed properly. The paper on the table rustled in the wind. The person on the bed opened her eyes. She lit the lamp and got out of bed. She walked to the window and looked at the night sky. The capital was quiet. There was not the slightest bit of panic about the war. It was hard to imagine what the soldiers were doing on the battlefield thousands of li away. Behind her, a maid's sleepy voice sounded. "Madam, why are you up?" Xia Chengxiu smiled. "It's nothing. I just couldn't sleep." The maid walked to her side and reached out to close the window. She supported her as she walked in. "Madam, be careful. Now that you're pregnant, the spring wind is cold. Don't catch a cold. If the general asks, I will have to suffer." The entire Yin manor knew that although General Yin was arrogant and domineering, he did not like to punish his subordinates. However, as long as it concerned Xia Qingxiu, he would be very calculative. When Xia Qingxiu first entered the manor, the beautiful daughter of the manor's housekeeper was hostile towards Xia Qingxiu. She secretly provoked him. When General Yin found out, he chased her and her family out of the manor. He did not give them any face. Before this expedition, Yin He had specifically told everyone in the Yin manor that if anything happened to Xia Qingxiu and the child in her belly, the entire manor would be implicated. General Yin was a man of his word. Of course, the servants were always worried about Xia Qingxiu, afraid that something would happen. Xia Qingxiu could not help but laugh when he thought of how worried Yin He was. He said, "It's not that exaggerated. I have people looking after me in the manor. The doctor comes to check my pulse every day. I'm not that delicate." The servant girl smiled and said, "The general is also worried about Madam." Xia Qingxiu lowered her head and looked at her lower abdomen. She reached out and touched it. She couldn't feel anything, but strangely, she felt as if she could sense the joy of the little guy inside her through the touch of her blood vessels. The servant girl saw her actions and asked with a smile, "If the general can catch up with the birth of the young master or young lady, that would be good. The general loves Madam so much. After the young master and young lady are born, he will be the best father in Shuajing." "If that's the case," Xia Qingxiu said with a smile, "he must have thought of how to teach the child." The child had not been born, but he had already named it. Xia Qingxiu did not know whether to laugh or cry. Before he left, he seriously apologized to Muxia. He said that the war was urgent and that he could not accompany her for now. When he returned, he would make it up to her and asked her not to be angry at her father. Who knew if the child in her belly was a Muxia or a Liangjiang? However, Xia Qingxiu inexplicably looked forward to it. What would Yin He be like when he became a father? Before she married Yin He, she had seen this young man's fierce and provocative appearance. At that time, she did not expect that this person would become her husband. She also did not expect that the general of Guide, who fought against the heavens and earth outside, would be so obedient to her at home. If he became a father, whether it was a Muxia or a Liangjiang, he would love and teach them with all his heart. He would watch them grow up day by day and become outstanding people, just like him. "Madam, you miss the general, right?" The servant girl beside her looked at her expression and asked. Xia Qingxiu smiled. Under the light, the woman's originally gentle eyes were unbelievably gentle. After some time, she made a sound of agreement and replied seriously, "I miss him." Chapter 263. After the Guyu rain, it would be summer soon. At this time of the year, it should be raining nonstop. But in Jiuquan, the desert stretched as far as the eye could see. It was already summer, and the sun was long and hot. The soldiers' lips were cracked and peeling. The battle was particularly fierce. After the victory of the first battle, Hien led the Fiyue army to fight against the Yudo several times. The Wutuo people had suffered at the hands of the Marquis of Wu and time again. They gradually understood that the Marquis of Wu and was not a useless person who was lucky enough to be appointed an official. Her ingenuity in setting up formations, her bravery in battle, and even her proficiency in swordsmanship made the Wutuo people think of the legendary General Fei Hong. It was the same. Hien began to counterattack after several battles and roughly grasped the Yudo's fighting style. She was very patient and was not in a hurry to attack the city. She only used the tactic of defend when the enemy comes, pursue when the enemy leaves, attack when the enemy leaves. The Yudo could not stand the constant harassment. For a long time, their morale was low and they were depressed and tired. It seemed that they were losing the battle each time. Today was the day to attack the city. A woman in red armor galloped on the battlefield on a horse. Flags and drums shook the sky, and swords flashed. Under her command, the army was as agile as a dragon and rushed toward the enemy's camp with a murderous aura. Her sword was indomitable. The two armies fought, and the land was dyed red. Mai Mai was fighting with a strong Yudo man. Although he was young and strong, He was not as good as Shirtu in terms of skill. At this moment, he was using all his strength. Suddenly, he kicked the knee of the man in front of him. The man staggered from the kick. Mamai took advantage of this opportunity and slit his throat. His opponent fell. He was relieved, but before he could show a happy smile, he was suddenly pushed to the ground and rolled twice. Xiaomai's heart tightened. He subconsciously raised his head and saw Shirtu holding him with his back. A black arrow pierced his back, leaving only a bit of the arrow feather exposed. Shirtu's lips moved, but he only had time to say 2 words, "Be careful." Another arrow pierced his back. The young man spat out a mouthful of blood. "Run, big brother," Xiaomai shouted in grief. On the other side, Wang Ba saw this and rushed toward the 2 Yudo archers who were lying in ambush. The lively young man, who was always smiling, was now panicked. Big, big, big. Stone strenuously looked at his younger brother in front of him. 2 arrows had hit him in the chest. His strength was slowly draining away. The battlefield was so chaotic, and little Wheat was in danger. Then, the light in his eyes went out. Xiaomai let out a painful cry. Unfortunately, this was a battlefield, and no one noticed his sadness. Death happened at any time and place. Huang Xiong's armor was broken, and there were many wounds on his body and face. He was already very old. He could easily deal with ordinary thieves, but it was a little difficult to deal with these fierce and cunning Yudo. The Yudo in front of him was fighting with him. His hand was cut by a knife, and his flesh was badly mutilated. When he held his knife, he felt a piercing pain. His strength was gradually draining away. Even the golden knife that had accompanied him for many years became extraordinarily heavy, as if it was difficult to wield. The Yudo saw his exhaustion. He laughed and said, "No, this big guy can't take it anymore." Probably because of his majestic appearance and the conspicuous golden knife, the Yudo paid attention to him and shouted, "This knife is mine." Huang Xiong said in a low voice, "In your dreams." He held the big knife in his hand and chopped at the edge of the opponent's knife. At this moment, he suddenly felt a chill on his back. A long knife penetrated his chest from his back, and he staggered. The Yudo behind him laughed presumptuously. However, halfway through his laughter, the bear-like man shouted and suddenly turned around. Ignoring the wounds on his body, he raised the big knife in his hand and instantly cut off the head of the Yudo behind him. The other man's complacent laughter also came to an abrupt end at the moment when a ray of golden light was about to take his life. The armor on his body was completely pierced by the tip of the knife. He held the handle and pulled it out. The moment he pulled it out, he finally couldn't hold on and fell to the ground. In his hand, he was still holding the golden knife tightly. For so many years, he had been homeless because of this knife, but it was also this knife that accompanied him for thousands of miles to kill his enemies. He was now alone in this world, and he had no attachments. Before he died, he only had this close friend who had accompanied him for many years to accompany him. But the strong man looked at the sky. The prayer beads on his chest were warm and dark. In a trance, he saw his mother gently praying in front of the temple for her son to return soon. His sisters were preparing hot dishes. His elder brother was in the courtyard asking his nephew about the homework he had just learned today. It was so peaceful, so comfortable. He closed his eyes in peace, and his expression was unprecedentedly peaceful. The Longzi had been wandering outside for so long, and now he could finally return home. The city was broken. Their armor and soldiers were withdrawn, and their bones were exposed in the wilderness. The soldiers cheered for this hard-won victory. Everyone who survived had a happy smile on their face. The woman in the lead was in high spirits, and she didn't look tired at all. She was always like this, as if she never had a weak side. It was because of her that the morale of the Fuyua army was rising day by day. Yudo was beaten to the point of abandoning the city and escaping. At this point, Jiuchuan was finally retaken by the Wei. He-Yan's face still had traces of blood that he hadn't had time to wipe off. Just as he was about to go and count the spoils of war, he saw Wang Ba walk towards him with a serious expression. The smile at the corner of his lips immediately disappeared. "Come take a look," he said. In the past few days of war, people constantly died. The men from the Liang province guard finally realized that this time was different from the previous times. The war made them grow quickly and made them quiet, determined, and calm. Wang Ba was no longer the person who would shout and shout. These days, he was much quieter. He and followed him forward. The soldiers who died in battle could only be buried on the spot. The soldiers who survived were checked one by one to see if they had any keepsakes on them. If they could find them, they would return to Shuajing and give them to their families. Before the soldiers here went to battle, most of them had a letter on them. If they were unfortunate enough to die in battle, their comrades would bring the letter back to their families. He saw Shi Tu and Huang Xiong. She understood a long time ago that when people went onto the battlefield, they couldn't decide whether they lived or died. The moment they put on their armor, they were prepared to give up their lives. The people who survived to the end were the least fortunate. They couldn't help but see their comrades leave one by one. First, it was Hong Shan. Now it was Shi Tu and Huang Xiong. Shi Tu had died from an arrow. The arrow had been pulled out, and the clothes on his chest had been dyed red. Huang Xiong had died from a blade. Rumor had it that in the end, he had perished together with Tu Yudo. When they finally found him, he was still tightly gripping the blade in his hand. He half knelt in front of the two of them and carefully tidied up their tattered clothes. Xiao Mai cried until her voice was hoarse. Her eyes were red. He still remembered the first time she met Shi Tu and Xiao Mai. They were hunters who grew up in the mountains. They told her about their ambition to join the army. Xiao Mai was lively and naive. She loved to eat and play. Shi Tu was taciturn and prudent. The war had changed everything. A soldier asked, "Sir, Brother Huang's blade. If such a good blade was used on the battlefield, it would make people envious. He has no family. This blade is his family. It has accompanied him for so many years. It should be buried with him." He looked at the man on the ground, the big brother who couldn't tell the direction and always got lost. Looking at the calm smile on his face, it seemed that he had already found the way home. She stood up. Her sadness lasted for only a moment. She said, "Tell them to come to my tent. I have something to discuss about the war." Her footsteps were firm. She didn't look back. As if to celebrate the victory of retaking Jiuquan, the moon came out in the middle of the night. The woman in the tent put the last stroke on the map. She rubbed her eyes, stood up, and walked out. She climbed up the city gate tower and looked into the distance. Outside the city, there was a vast expanse of yellow sand. In the distance, the beacon fire shone on the flat ground. The Gobi Desert was desolate. The white city gate tower here was like a lonely boat in the deep sea. A crescent moon hung in the night sky, illuminating the desolate night. She sat down on the ground. Her stomach made a soft sound. She realized that she hadn't eaten anything since the end of the war. Tian was startled when a dry biscuit was handed to her. Jiang Jiao walked over from behind and sat down beside her. He said, "I knew you probably didn't eat, so I saved it for you." Tian smiled. "Thank you." She took a bite of the dry biscuit. The coarse grain entered her stomach, bringing her true satisfaction. Jiang Jiao handed her a bottle of water. She raised her head and drank a big mouthful. Her posture was cheerful. There were still traces of mud and blood on her face. She looked particularly haggard. Only her eyes were still as bright as the stars. He suddenly felt a little emotional. In the Fuyue army, everyone said that Yin was born brave. She commanded troops like a god and never felt tired. Even the men needed to rest after such a big battle. However, since she left the battlefield, she had been counting the results of the war, arranging and commanding the next pursuit, and reanalyzing the enemy's situation. Until now, she hadn't changed her clothes or eaten any dry food. Only now, on the city gate tower, when she sat on the ground, did she reveal a little of her own exhaustion. He heard Yan's voice. "How is Xiaoma?" "Not so good. Wang Ba has been accompanying her." Jiang Jiao's voice lowered. Half of the Liangzhou guards had left. As for who would be the next to leave, and who would be able to walk to the end and return to Shuajing alive, no one could say for sure. Yan raised her head and drank a mouthful of water. Her voice was still calm. "We have to make him come out quickly." These words were cruel, but Jiang Jiao understood that this was a battlefield. On the battlefield, there was no time for sorrow. Yin didn't cry, but that didn't mean she wasn't sad. After all, she was a woman. Staying here alone and watching the people around her leave one by one should be very powerless. Brother He, Jiang Jiao asked, "Do you miss the commander?" He was answered with silence. After a while, Yin raised her head and looked far away from the city gate tower. In the desolate desert, only the silver-white crescent moon quietly hung in the night sky. No. She raised the corner of her mouth slightly. It was as if she saw another person through the crescent moon. "I know he's here." The sound of crows came from afar. The cold night wind blew the torches like stars. The young female, General, stood up and patted the shoulder of the person beside her. "Let's go back early. There's still a tough battle to fight tomorrow." She turned and left. G region had been raining for days. The rainwater washed away the mud and blood on the ground. If not for the scattered weapons and corpses, Bing wouldn't be able to tell that there had just been a fierce battle. In the tent, a man dressed in hemp clothes looked at the general sitting in the tent. He was shocked and angry. "Yin Nangguang, you don't want to live anymore." His last white robe was not spared from the fate of being cut into strips of cloth. From then on, he wore the hemp clothes of a commoner and walked through the Yin family army camp. Today, the Lin family young master no longer had his elegant demeanor. 20 hours a day, his face was dirty and his hands were stained with blood. The battle was getting more and more tense by the day. There were more and more injured soldiers. There were not enough military doctors. And he was the most powerful one here. He was also the one who made people feel at ease. But today, only Lin Shuanghe knew how uneasy he was, and he did not pay any attention to him. He only frowned as he counted the results of last night's battle. Last night, the Yin army had defeated the Wutuo people. They had killed 10,000 enemies and seized over 1,000 horses. This was a good thing worthy of celebration. "Yin Nangguang, did you hear what I said?" Lin Shuanghe said anxiously. "I heard you." And he replied impatiently. "Then do you know that you are in danger now?" Lin Shuanghe lowered his voice. "You will lose your life." That day, Yin he acted and saved the father of 2 children from the hands of the Wutuo people. However, he was injured by the Wutuo people who had secretly shot him. Although his vital organs were not injured, only his arm was pierced. However, the other party had originally come for him, and the arrow was smeared with poison. Lin Shuanghe could not detoxify the poison. On the battlefield, there were no herbs for him to slowly develop an antidote. The poison was spreading day by day. If he did not find an antidote soon, then he would die. But he had been killing and fighting for the past few days. The poison on his wound had spread faster and deeper. It made Lin Shuanghe's heart jump. If Yin he could temporarily put aside the battle, the poison would spread slower and he might be able to last longer. But now, if this continued, maybe he would not be able to wait until he returned to Shuajing. "Have you developed an antidote?" Yin he frowned and asked. Lin Shuanghe was startled. He replied dejectedly, "No. Since you're going to die, why do you care so much?" And he said disapprovingly. He did not seem to care at all. It was as if he was talking about someone else's life. He did not even feel worried. Lin Shuanghe asked, "Do you really want to continue like this?" "Lin Shuanghe, this is a battlefield." Yin he's voice was solemn. "Recently, we have been receiving good news. The Yudo's morale has been greatly damaged. If this continues, we will be able to take back Ji County very soon. At this time, we have to strike while the iron is hot. If we don't take them down when their morale is at its peak, it will be difficult to wait for such an opportunity in the future. On the battlefield, there is no time to rest." Lin Shuanghe closed his eyes. He knew that Yin he was right. What he said was the truth. However, as a medical practitioner, he knew that if this continued, there might be a slim chance of survival, but it would become impossible. "You have to know," he spoke with difficulty. "If you continue like this and don't rest, at most 3 months. 3 months. Yin he said, "Then we will finish this battle within 3 months." Until now, he was still thinking about the outcome of this battle. Lin Shuanghe could not help but say, "Even if you don't care, don't you think about Qingxiu? Yin Nangguang, your child is still waiting for you to return." Yin's fingers trembled slightly, but his expression remained normal. He said nonchalantly, "Since you know, then hurry up and create an antidote for me. Otherwise, what's the use of having you here? Since you are a godly doctor, do you only know how to treat women and not men?" If it was any other time, Lin Shuanghe would have stepped forward to argue with someone who questioned his medical skills. But now he only looked at Yin. He suddenly understood that even if this person knew that he only had one day to live, he would use this last day to be a good commander. On the battlefield, he was not Xia Chengxiu's husband, nor was he Yin Muxia's father. He was the leader of the Yin army, the general of Dawei. That was all. "I understand." Lin Shuanghe looked at him deeply. "I will do my best." He turned and walked out. In front of the table, Yin raised his eyes and looked at Lin Shuanghe's back. Suddenly, he vomited a ball of black blood. The poison would not only cause him to lose his life, it would also cause him to suffer. But this could not be revealed in front of others. The Yin army needed a backbone. Before they won this battle, he could never fall. Yin casually pulled a cloth from the side and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. His painful expression disappeared, and his gaze landed on the defensive map in front of him again. 3 months, he had to end this battle quickly. In the academy, on the green lotus leaves in the pond, pink buds started to appear. Dragonflies swept across the water, their glass-like wings creating a faint ripple. After the beginning of summer, the days became longer. The wind also brought with it warm sunlight. In the afternoon, in the academy, the sun was just right. The youth sat down and dozed off. Good times were always exceptionally long. Someone ran in from outside with joy and excitement. He jumped onto the table in one breath and said, "Good news! Good news! Marquis Wuan, the Fuyue army led by Master He, has taken back Juchuan and defeated the Wu Tao bandits." The originally dull afternoon was instantly awakened by this news. Really? They took back Juchuan so quickly? It's true. The news is already spread outside. I just came back from outside. That Marquis Wu and is very powerful. The 4 great generals sent out their troops separately, but the Fuyue army, led by a woman, was the first to take down a city. So what if she is a woman? Wasn't the original leader of the Fuyue army, General Fei Hong, also a woman? I think Marquis Wuan is also a heroine. Who knows, maybe when she returns to the capital, the emperor will give her a high-ranking official. In the future, she will be the Wuan general. In the corner of the academy, the youth who was sitting there was stunned. When he heard this news, he still couldn't believe it. He and one? He took back Juchuan? Just as he was thinking, a group of people suddenly surrounded him. "He Yinsheng, your sister is so powerful. She achieved merit so quickly. I think your He family will only soar up in the future. Hey, brother He, from today onwards, we are good brothers. When you become successful in the future, don't forget to help this little brother." Bah, all of you are talking behind Master He's back. All of you are relying on military Governor Shao and don't have any ability. Now all of you are slapping your faces. That master, he went to Jiuchuan by himself, but he was able to send back the news before Generals Yin, Military Governor Shao, and Huwei General. It can be seen that he is truly capable. Yes, he is truly capable. I have eyes but failed to recognize Mount Tai. Brother Yinsheng. He Yinsheng was surrounded by people, but he wasn't blinded by the enthusiastic compliments of his classmates. There was only one thought in his mind. He Yin won, and she was safe. The youth slightly turned his head, and the corners of his mouth couldn't help but curl up. In his heart, he thought, at least she kept her promise this time. The pomegranate tree in Shao Mansion became the best place to hide from the sun during summer. The yellow dog was lying under the tree, lazily squinting its eyes. Qing Mei added water to its water tank and wiped the sweat from its forehead. Just as she was about to return to her room, a shadow suddenly jumped in from outside and said cheerfully, "Sister Qing Mei, Sister Qing Mei." Qing Mei was startled. When she saw Bai Guo running over like a gust of wind, she hurriedly supported her. "What's the matter? Why are you so happy?" "I just went outside and heard the people outside saying that second young madam won the battle and led the Fuyue army to take back Jiuchuan." Qing Mei, second young madam, has done a great deed. Air Mao was also infected by Gua's excitement. He jumped up and ran 2 circles around Bai Gua. Bai Rongwei was supported by a maidservant as she walked over. She couldn't hide the surprise in her voice. Really? It's true, Bai Gua happily said. They say that second young madam is very powerful. Although it's the first time she led an army alone, she has won many battles and took back Jiuquan so quickly. This servant heard that when second young madam comes back, the emperor will definitely reward her handsomely. Who knows? Maybe we'll have another general in our mansion. Bai Rongwei was amused by her words and said angrily, "You really know how to talk." She then shook her head and smiled. The reward for the meritorious service is not important. As long as Ahe is safe, everyone will be happy. Her lower abdomen was gradually bulging. But because of the war at the border, Xiao Ruby was also very busy every day. When Bai Rongwei was alone, she couldn't help but worry about Xiao Ju and Hien. If the 2 of them were in the same place, it would be fine. They could take care of each other, but they were in opposite directions. Xiao Ju was fine because she was always on the battlefield. The Nanfu army was also led by Xiao Zhongwu, but Hien was different. It was her first time leading an army. Not everyone in the Fuyue army was convinced. She was also a woman, so there were many inconveniences. Bai Rongwei's heart was broken. Now, she could finally breathe a sigh of relief. I think it won't be long before Uncle he returns. Bai Rongwei smiled and said, if he knows that he has won a battle, he will be very happy. Ever since Hien and Xiao Ju left the capital, Bai Rongwei and Xiao Jing went to He Sui's house more frequently. First, the house that Xiao Ju bought for them was close to the Xiao family. It was only a street away, so it was convenient for them to come and go. Second, Bai Rongwei thought that if she, as the sister-in-law, was so worried He Sui, as the father, would be even more worried. He Yinshang was also a 17 or 18-year-old youth. In the end, he wasn't as caring as his daughter. Xiao Zhongwu and his wife had passed away early. He Sui was Yian's father, so he was their father. Therefore, the husband and wife often went to talk to He Sui to relieve his boredom. This in-law was more harmonious than the other families in the capital. Eldest young master will be back soon, Bai Gua chirped. Foreign, since today is a happy occasion, this servant will go to the kitchen to make some good dishes. Let's treat it as a celebration. Okay, Bai Rongwei smiled and said, Qing Mei, you should also go to the He family. Tonight, call Uncle He and Yunshang to eat together. Qing Mei heard this and revealed a big smile. Okay, this servant will go now. In the palace, in the imperial study, Zhaokong Emperor looked at the memorial in front of him and couldn't help but reveal a gratified smile. Since he ascended the throne, this was probably the happiest thing. The chamberlain saw the expression on the emperor's face and said, The Empress Dowager came this morning. Your Majesty is busy with government affairs. It is already late. Zhaokong Emperor stood up and said, Zhen will go see Muhu in Qinglan Palace. Concubine Lan, who should be the Empress Dowager now, was leaning on a soft couch and reading. Although she was already the Empress Dowager, she didn't move out of the palace. Her actions were the same as before. Muhu, Zhaokong Emperor approached and called out. The Empress Dowager put down the scroll in her hand and looked at the person in front of her. She smiled slightly. Your Majesty seems to be in a good mood today. Are you happy because of the victory in Jiuquan? In front of his mother, Emperor Zhaokong finally revealed his true feelings. He smiled and said, Of course, I didn't think that the Wuhan Marquis would be so valiant. Compared to Yin He, Xiao Huaijin, he was the first to take down a city. Although he originally gave the military power to Hien, most of it was for the sake of Xiao Ju. As for Hien's ability, he had only heard about it from others. He didn't know how good she was at leading troops in battle. Now, the news of victory made him feel relieved. This woman was more outstanding than he had imagined. It seems that your Majesty still underestimated her. You didn't think that Marquis Wen could really gallop on the battlefield. The Empress Dowager understood. Zhaokong Emperor was a little embarrassed. Zhen just didn't expect that there would be a second woman like General Fei Hong in this world. Back then, General Fei Hong was already 1 in 10,000. It was a pity that such a talent had fallen. Now, such a lucky general had appeared. Who wouldn't say that the heavens were blessing the Dawei? Ijia has already told you, the Empress Dowager said softly. Don't underestimate women. There are millions of women in Dawei. You don't know that there will be a third and a fourth General Fei Hong. Imperial Mother is right. Marquis Wuan is a pure and honest person. Such a good official can only be found by chance. Since your majesty has met her, you must recruit her. This time, she took back Juchuan and made a great contribution. The He family doesn't have any background. Has your majesty thought about how to reward Marquis Wuan? Hearing this, Xiaokong Emperor smiled and said, Imperial Mother doesn't need to worry about this. Zhen has already thought about it. When she returns to the court, Zhen will bestow her the title of a true general. From then on, she will leave her mark in the history of Dawei, just like General Fei Hong. Chapter 264. After Lixia was the Spring Festival. After the Spring Festival, the weather grew hotter and hotter, and it was almost a Dragon Boat Festival. Marquis Wuan led the Fuyue army to retake Juchuan. Reports of victory came one after another, and the 100,000 Yuchuo soldiers were routed. The remnants fled west and were completely wiped out by the Fuyue army. At this point, Hien had led the army for nearly 3 months, winning the desert and retaking Juchuan. The people of Juchuan cheered every day, celebrating this hard-won victory. No one in the Fuyue army dared to look down on this young marquis. She had used victory to prove her bravery and intelligence. Hien sat in his room, taking inventory of the spoils of war. In this final great victory, they had captured many prisoners and gained many spoils. A deputy general walked in and respectfully said, My lord, the Juchuan city lord wishes for you to stay until after the Dragon Boat Festival. The Yuchuo soldiers of Juchuan had no chance to counterattack. Originally, she had planned to immediately return to the capital after taking care of matters here. However, most likely out of gratitude to the Fuyue army for driving away the Yuchuo bandits, the people hoped that they could stay for a few more days. This was especially true for that female general. On the battlefield, she was awe-inspiring and intimidating, but she was exceptionally patient and pleasant to the common people. Hien asked, How many more days until the Dragon Boat Festival? 5 more days, the deputy general replied. Hien fell silent. Fine. After the Dragon Boat Festival, we will immediately depart. The people who had just experienced the chaos of war needed a bit of hope. If they stayed, they might be able to gain strength and better face the future that was about to begin anew. Other than fighting, this was the only thing she could do for the people here. The interior of the room was simple and clean. When the Yuchuo soldiers had occupied Juchuan, they had pillaged and burned everything of value. Even half of the wall of the room she was currently living in had been scorched. He gazed at the map on the table and sighed almost imperceptibly. In the end, they had retaken Juchuan. Yunzi and Ji Commandery still had not sent back news, but news from Pingjiang had arrived. It seemed that the situation was going well. The reason Juchuan was able to win so quickly was because she had led the army to quell the rebellion in the Western Chang. Mo County was similar to Juchuan in terms of geography, and the Fuyue army had once stayed in Mo County, which was why she was able to seize it so easily. He wondered how Yin He and Xiao Ju were doing. Just as she was thinking, someone came in from outside. It was actually Wang Ba. Wang Ba took out a letter from his bosom and said, There's a letter from Ji County. With his brothers dying in battle one after another, Wang Ba had become much calmer. It was hard to see the domineering and arrogant manner he used to have in the Liang Province Guards. Ian took the letter and opened it eagerly. The last time Ji County sent a letter, they only knew that the plague was not optimistic. After such a long time, they did not know how they were doing. The letter was not long, only a few words. As Ian read it, his expression became serious. Wang Ba noticed something was wrong with her expression and asked, What's wrong? Are those Yudo difficult to deal with? Ian shook her head. Something happened to Yan He. The letter was written by He Yin. Although it only mentioned a few sentences, every sentence made He Yin tremble with fear. G County had been in a stalemate with the Yudo for the past few months, but it was generally good. The only one who was not good was Yin He. The letter said that he had been poisoned with an incurable poison from the Yudo. It was said that Jiu Chuan had been taken back. Yunzi and Bingjiang were not in the same direction as G County. The only place that was slightly closer was Jiu Chuan, and he said that he did not have much time left. He was afraid that there would be no one to lead the army after he left, so he asked Yin to come and help. At the end of the letter, he even had the mood to tease him. He only said that when Yin asked for help in the Rendezvous, he led the army and rushed over. Now, he treated it as returning the favor of the Rendezvous. Although he still had the mood to joke, Yin knew that the situation would not be good. Lin Shuanghe followed Lin Shuanghe to Ji County. If it was a normal poison, how could Lin Shuanghe not be able to cure it? Yin's letter said that he did not have much time left. She suddenly stood up. Wang Ba asked, "What are you going to do?" "Pass down the order. I can't wait until after the Dragon Boat Festival. Today, I will prepare the army and set off tomorrow to Ji County." The grass and trees were lush in summer. After a night of rain, the soil was moist and had a fishy smell. By the river, a man in hemp clothes was crushing the herbs in front of him and carefully mixing a few herbs together. "Dr. Lin, you've been busy the whole night. Hurry up and get some rest," a soldier said as he passed by. Lin Shuanghe raised his head, revealing his unshaven face. He looked very haggard. Because he had been busy the whole night, his eyes were bloodshot. At first glance, it was quite scary. He raised his head and squinted his eyes because of the sunlight. After a while, he shook his head and said in a hoarse voice, "No." The patrolling soldiers were puzzled. They did not know what was wrong with Dr. Lin. A few days ago, he had been preparing some herbs day and night. Logically speaking, now that the plague had been quelled, he did not need to work so hard. However, they did not know why he was in such a hurry. However, Lin Shuanghe did not listen. There was nothing he could do. He could only shake his head and leave. Lin Shuanghe lowered his head and looked at the herbs in the jar. Almost 2 months had passed. He did not develop an antidote. What was worse was that Yin's poison was getting deeper and deeper. He had already started to vomit blood. The herbs he found could only temporarily make Yin look less haggard. This was to prevent the Yin army from finding out. The poison in the wound had already entered his organs. Lin Shuanghe was very clear that Yin did not have much time left. He worked day and night to find a solution. However, no matter how hard he tried, Yin's poison was useless. He had to admit that he was powerless. It was probably because in the past, although he was the white-shirt divine physician, he treated women's medicine. Most of the women's medicine did not have to worry about their lives. In life, the most important thing was life and death. As long as one was alive, there was no despair. But now, he had to watch helplessly as his friend approached death with each passing day. As a doctor, he was at a loss of what to do. Lin Shuanghe lowered his head and pounded the herbs. He muttered, "Faster, faster." The juices of the herbs in the jar splattered everywhere. Some of them splashed onto his face. There was a bitter fragrance. As he pounded, a huge sense of powerlessness and sorrow swept over him. He stopped what he was doing. Suddenly, his eyes turned red. He had never wanted to improve his medical skills as much as he did now. If he improved a little more, he would be able to save Yin He. He would not have to do such trivial things like now. However, the people around him did not know that every time their general fought, he paid the price with his life. Lin Shuanghe stood up and washed his hands by the river. He paused for a while and walked towards Yin He's tent. There was a suppressed cough. The moment Lin Shuanghe opened the tent curtain, he saw Yin He wiping the blood from the corner of his lips. "You!" he screamed in shock. "Lower your voice." Yin He shook his head. "Don't let others see." Lin Shuanghe put down the tent curtain. He took a few steps forward and grabbed Yin He's wrist to check his pulse. Yin He quietly allowed him to do so. After a while, Lin Shuanghe put down his hand. His lips trembled as he looked at him. Yin He asked, "How much longer do I have?" Lin Shuanghe did not answer him. "Looks like it's within these few days." Yin He smiled. There was some unwillingness in his smile, but it also seemed like he was relieved. Based on the time that I sent the letter to Hien, she should be here in a few days. The timing is just right. I don't know if I can meet her again. No, Lin Shuanghe instinctively said. I can still make the antidote. Wait for me, I can definitely do it. Moreover, those Yudo must have the antidote. As long as we find them, we will definitely get the antidote. You're still as stupid as before. Even if you have never fought in a war, you should have some brains. And he said, disdainfully, those Yudo saw me being shot by the arrow with their own eyes. It was not easy for them to get rid of me. Why would they hand over the antidote? Believe it or not, even if I catch their general now and use their general's life to exchange for the antidote, they will not hand over the antidote. There is only one possibility. If I am willing to surrender and be controlled by them, I may be lucky enough to keep my life. However, the men of the Yin family will not do such a thing. A general of the Guide army. Yinyi smiled. Even if they lose this war, they will not suffer any losses. And you? Yinyi frowned and looked at him. If you can make the antidote, would you wait until now? Forget it. You are just a doctor, not the king of hell. How can you decide a person's life and death? You don't have to think too highly of yourself. You should just keep your lowly life and wait for Marquis Wu to come and save it. Lin Shuanghe's expression was pained. Although he and Yinyi used to quarrel and dislike each other, they were still classmates who grew up together. Although he hated Yinyi for being arrogant and aggressive, and Yinyi also looked down on him for being ignorant and incompetent, after so many years, they could still be considered as friends. You don't have to look so sad. Yinyi looked at his expression, as if he was disgusted. As doctors, aren't you used to seeing life and death? Why are you not as open-minded as me? Why are you feeling so sad? After a few decades, you still have to come down and accompany me. I will go and find that cross-dressing classmate to spar. Why was he still thinking about sparring at this time? Lin Shuanghe could not help but laugh. After laughing, he felt even sadder. After a moment of silence, he asked, have you ever thought about what will happen to Madame and Muxia in the future? Yinyi's originally carefree expression suddenly froze. He thought of the woman who always smiled gently and looked forward to him before she left. She was so considerate. After knowing about his news, she would probably cry. She would probably be very sad. Yinyi suddenly became sad too. It was as if there was a lump of wet cotton in his chest, making him feel suffocated and depressed. After a long time, he slowly opened his mouth. Before I left, I promised Qingxiu that I would try my best to go back and see Muxia. However, it seems that I have to go back on my words. He lowered his head and laughed self-mockingly. Qingxiu hates people who go back on their words. If I don't go back, she will probably be angry. Lin Shuanghe, if you go back and see her, please tell her that I didn't do it on purpose. I have a bad temper. On the surface, everyone respects me, but I know that in reality, they don't like me. Just like you, Xiao Huaijin, and Hien. I'm not good as a friend, but I am good as a husband. I originally wanted to continue working hard and be the best father in Shuo City, but his voice was very low. There's no more chance. Lin Shuanghe wanted to say something, but when he opened his mouth, he did not know what to say. I originally thought that if Qingxiu gave birth to a daughter, she would be called Muxia. If it was a son, he would be called Liangjiang. But now that I think about it, if it was a son, he could also be called Muxia. I originally wanted to watch her grow up with my own eyes. When she is older, I will teach her that a good general does not fear death and a martyr does not destroy his integrity to survive. There is no other way now, but I feel that there is nothing better than this to teach her. In the future, when she grows up and knows that her father died on the battlefield, I will not have to teach her. She will understand on her own. When he talked about the unborn Muxia, his gaze finally softened. It was filled with longing and tenderness. Lin Shuanghe closed his eyes. These last words were like countless sharp needles stabbing into his heart at the same time. You don't have to be sad for me, and you don't have to feel heartache for me. A general dying on the battlefield is the best ending. Although I have regrets, I do not regret it. Yinyi stood up and walked out of the tent. He looked into the distance, in the direction of the city gate tower. Everyone who goes to the battlefield is prepared to die here. There are still a few more days, he said. Let's continue and look forward. When Yin arrived at Ji County, he saw a completely different Lin Shuanghe from the past. The elegant young master who always wore a white robe and a folding fan, who always had a graceful demeanor, was haggard. His clothes were stained with blood and mud. His face looked like it had not been washed for a few days. His beard was unkempt. He was so dispirited that Yin almost did not recognize him at first glance. Brother Lin. She jumped off the horse and went forward to ask. You came. Lin Shuanghe's dim eyes finally showed a bit of life. He muttered, come and see Yin. He died on the battlefield. He was poisoned with an incurable poison. He knew that intense activity would cause the poison to spread faster and deeper, but because of the war, he was unwilling to stop. He was like a candle that only had one piece left. He burned with all his might and finally burned himself out. Before he died, he had just won a battle. The young general was lying in the tent. The stains on his face had been wiped clean. His hair was tied up high like it was when he was young. The silver spear was placed at his side. She could vaguely see his former high-spirited appearance. But when Yin walked over, he would no longer be angry and arrogant as he challenged her to a duel. He knew that he did not have much time left. Before he left, he told me to give these to you. Lin Shuanghe handed the box to Yin. Yin opened it and saw that it was filled with written documents. And he had counted all of the battle situation and military horses in Ji County. He had written everything down so that when Yin came here, he would not be confused. He had done everything very well. Even at the last moment of his life, he was still thinking about this battle. How is Ji County? Yin asked. Lin Shuanghe shook his head. His voice was low. After Yin he left, the morale of the Yin army was in chaos. The Yudo took this opportunity to attack twice. Without the Yin army was like a pile of scattered sand. Yin said, it was not the Yin army's fault. Ji County's location was easy to defend and hard to attack. They had the advantage. If he wanted to attack, it was already very difficult. Also, he used such a despicable method. Then now, I want to see the deputy general of the Yin army now. We will discuss this. Yin replied. Lin Shuanghe nodded silently. Yin turned to leave. Suddenly, he thought of something. He stopped and turned back to look at Lin Shuanghe. Brother Lin. Her voice was calm, and her gaze seemed to have the power to soothe people's hearts. It was not your fault that you did not save Yin. With one sentence, Lin Shuanghe finally had an outlet to vent the self-blame and guilt that he had been feeling for the past few days. No, his voice was trembling. For the first time, he showed a weak expression in front of Yin. I did not find the antidote. After he left, his subordinates finally got to know that he was poisoned. They blamed him for not being able to find the antidote, even though he was the so-called godly doctor and couldn't save their general. Countless accusations and curses constantly filled his ears. Even Lin Shuanghe would wake up from nightmares at night. The woman in red armor looked at him and said gently, you are a doctor, not a god. You can only save people. You cannot decide life and death. And he was poisoned by Yudo. If you want to avenge him, you have to win this battle. You have to pull yourself together, Dr. Lin. She changed the way she addressed him. I need your help. Ji County needs you. In the tent, He's deputy general, Chun Chung, blurted out. What did you say? Surrender? It's a fake surrender. Yin said, since Yudo already knows that Generals Yin is not here, the Yin army is like a group of dragons without a leader. These few days, they will definitely take advantage of the victory to attack. Instead of being restrained by them, it is better to pretend to surrender. After our people enter the city, the Fiua army and Yin army will hold the rear and take advantage of the chaos to break through the city gates. When General Yin is here, we have always faced the Yudo head-on. The Yin army will never surrender, even if it is a fake. Chun Chung refuted immediately. Yin was not angry. He only looked at him calmly. You have stayed here for so long and should be very clear about the terrain of Ji County. If you do not break through the city gates and continue to camp outside the city, you will only be wasting your energy. And he led you to face the Yudo head-on and won many times. You killed many Udo, but what happened in the end? What happened in the end? G County City is still occupied by the Udo. If you cannot enter the city, you cannot win this battle. What do you know? Chun Chung was agitated. You do not understand Generals Yin at all. You and that Lin Shuanghe are in cahoots. You're just a figurehead. You will only make things worse. Yin He's death was a painful blow to the Yin army. They hated Lin Shuanghe for not telling the truth earlier. However, they knew nothing about Yin He's efforts. He Yan's eyes turned cold. The deputy general of the Fuyue army beside him reprimanded. What figurehead? So he just led his troops to reclaim Jiuquan and won the battle. What right do you have to look down on him? The Yin army had never seen He Yan's abilities on the battlefield. However, the Fuyue army had seen it clearly. If He Yan was just a figurehead, then there were not many generals in the Wei who could live up to their name. I'm not discussing with you, He Yan said coldly. I'm giving you an order. If you do not listen and disobey my orders, what will happen to you? She pulled out the long sword at her waist. The light of the sword was as cold as ice. You could try. You, Chun Chung gritted his teeth. You are leading the Fuyue army, not the Yin army. The leader of the Yin army is only the general's Yin. Why do you have to order us around? Because your general gave me the commander's seal. Because your general personally asked me to lead your troops. She waved her hand, and the commander's seal appeared in everyone's eyes. Now, the woman's eyes were clear and calm. Do you have any objections? With the commander's seal in hand, she could command the Yin army. Even if Chun Chung was extremely unwilling, he could not say anything now. He gritted his teeth and said no. I know you are not convinced, He Yin said, so I will personally lead the vanguard troops who pretended to surrender. Chun Chung was stunned. The troops that entered the city first were undoubtedly in the most danger. They were like sheep in a tiger's den. The Wei's troops were all outside the city. They were surrounded by Udo troops. If the Udo suddenly changed their minds and killed them, their troops would be sent to their deaths. Are you sure? Chun Chung asked suspiciously. Ian glanced at him. For some reason, Chun Chung felt his face heat up. The woman's voice was calm and calm. Leading the troops is something that every general will do. It is not just your general's Yin. Also, she said, Dr. Lin was also following your general's orders. If you want to push all the blame onto a doctor and ignore the Wutuo, people who really killed your general, then I have nothing to say. It's just that her voice carried a hint of mockery. If your general sees this scene, he will probably be very disappointed in the troops he single-handedly built. Chun Chung wanted to say something, but the woman ignored him and left the tent. He Yan was stunned when she left the tent. Lin Shuanghe stood outside the tent and looked at her in a daze. It seemed that he had heard everything she said inside. It didn't matter if he heard it. That was what she thought anyway. Thank you. After a moment of silence, Lin Shuanghe took the initiative to speak. He smiled bitterly. But by speaking up for me like this, you have implicated them. I'm just speaking the truth. He Yan looked into the distance. You followed Yin He here. Along the way, you put down the plague and treated the wounded soldiers. You put your head on your belt. But she smiled. You don't have to hate them. They're just too sad and think wrongly. As time passes, they will understand. I don't hate them. Lin Shuanghe took a deep breath and changed the topic. I just heard you say that you want to pretend to surrender. The Fuyue army's camp is not close to here. Those Udo probably haven't noticed our arrival. They are confident. If we surrender now, they will believe us and open the gate. Only by opening the gate, we will have the chance to take down all the Udo. Is the vanguard that entered the city gate very dangerous? The wind blew, and the woman's long hair fluttered gently. Her voice was firm and calm without any hesitation. The battlefield is dangerous, she said. I am not afraid of danger. Chapter 265. On the first day of the 6th month, the tightly shut city gates of G County finally opened. 2,000 Wei soldiers were the first to enter the city and surrender to the Udo soldiers. After the death of Guide Lieutenant General Yin He, the remaining Yin family army was like a sheet of loose sand. They were unable to deal with the attacks launched by the Udo. Now that they had lost and had no reinforcements, it was only a matter of time before they surrendered. The Udo did not suspect anything. The Udo soldiers on both sides of the city gates all held their blades and mocked the weakness of the Dawei soldiers. Yin was hiding in the ranks of the Dawei soldiers. Her face was covered in dust, and her original appearance could not be seen. She was mixed in with the troops. These 2,000 people were all personally selected by Yin. The majority of them were from the Fuyue army. There was no other reason. She had not gotten used to the Yin family army yet. The Fuyue army had fought alongside her for a period of time and had a tacit understanding. This time, entering the city would be very dangerous. Nothing could go wrong. After Yin He's death, the only person who had a say in the Yin family army was his lieutenant, Chun Chung. At the end of the road, Udo General Sha Jite saw Chun Chung walk forward and laughed. Dawei is a coward. That's all there is to it. Chun Chung lowered his head and asked, "If my army surrenders to the Udo, can you let my soldiers live?" Of course, of course. Sha Jite was very muscular and mocked. "Since you have surrendered to the Udo, from now on, you are the Udo. We will not attack our own people." "Then, Sir Sha Jite, please open the city gates and accept Dawei's surrender," Chun Chung replied. Sha Jite's eyes flashed. Opening the city gates is a small matter. However, the surrendered soldiers must be like you. He pointed at the troops. Put down their weapons and tie their hands. That is the only way. He still did not trust Dawei. Chun Chung said, "That is not a problem." He said, "Please allow me to send someone back to explain this matter." Sagat, all right. Chun Chung walked to the side of a soldier and whispered a few words into his ear. The soldier nodded and turned to walk towards the city gate. Halfway through, a Udo standing at the side suddenly knocked an arrow and shot it through the chest of the soldier, who went back to pass the order. The soldier didn't even have time to cry out before he fell to the ground and stopped moving. Chun Chung was furious. "What's going on? Didn't you tell him to go back and pass on the order? You're all captives now. How dare you raise conditions with us?" The Udo who was holding his bow said with disdain, "If you spout any more nonsense, I'll kill you as well." Sharjit smiled and said, "Why are you angry? He's just an ordinary soldier. Can't you just send another person?" Their attitude was clearly to provoke Dawei's soldiers. Yin knew that something was wrong. Before he could say anything, a soldier from the Yin family charged towards the Udo in front of him and shouted, "I'd rather die than be humiliated. Let's fight them to the death." Yin sighed his heart. The style of a general would affect the actions of the entire army. He was direct and courageous, and the soldiers under him were the same. They cannot be provoked. Now, all their previous preparations were useless. But so what? The soldiers in front of him had already exchanged blows with the Udo. Before they entered the city, they had already taken off their weapons. Now, they could only snatch the blades from the enemy's hands with their bare hands. It was tragic and dangerous. Yin kicked away the Udo that was charging towards him and snatched the long blade from his hand. He shouted, "Boys, follow me." On the battlefield outside Yunzi City, the Golden Cavalry was covered in blood. The Udo soldiers outside the city were beaten until they covered their heads and ran away like rats. The reason why the Killer General was called the Killer General, the Nine Flags Battalion, was called the Nine Flags Battalion, and the Nanfu soldiers were called the Nanfu soldiers because those who had fought with them had mostly died on the battlefield. Bystanders could only hear from the mouths of those who had escaped with their lives that this army was invincible. But when they actually faced them on the battlefield, they would know that the rumors were not even 1/10 of their strength. Among the thousands of soldiers and horses, the black-armored youth with a long sword was like an emissary from hell. His sword was as cold and indifferent as his gaze. His jade-like appearance brought with it endless killing intent. And he wasn't fighting alone. The cavalry behind him was like his shield, but also like his spear, making this army seem invincible and intimidating at first glance. The soldiers of one person were like wolves and tigers, like wind and rain, like thunder and lightning. They shook the world and shocked the world. This was a crucial battle, and also the final battle to besiege the city. As long as they won this battle, they would be able to take back Yunzi. The rest was just to clean up the mess. But for this battle, Xiao Ju and the Nanfu soldiers had been waiting for a long time. The Yudo and Yunzi were not willing to open the city gates to face the Nanfu soldiers. They were afraid of the reputation of the Nanfu soldiers and the Nine Flags Battalion. They still had reserves in the city of Yunzi, but the Great Way soldiers and horses stationed outside the city would run out of rations one day. Xiao Ju ordered people to carry rations outside the city every day. He purposely let the Yudo who came to investigate in secret see him. 1 or 2 days was fine, but after a long time, the Yudo would also become suspicious. Seeing that the Dowei soldiers had sufficient rations and high morale, they could not help but be alarmed and fearful. But that was not all. Long before coming to Yunzi, Xiao Ju had already arranged for a few skilled craftsmen in the South House Army to follow them. After arriving at Yunzi, he sent the army and the craftsmen to secretly dig a tunnel that led to Yunzi City. He also ordered people to use crossbows to shoot stone arrows into the city to harass the Yudo. After a long time, the Yudo were on tenterhooks. Even though their leader ordered them not to leave the city, their morale was shaken. The battle of wits between generals was sometimes just a competition of who could keep their cool. Whoever could not keep their cool first would lose. The Yudo that occupied Yunzi fell for Xiao Ju's psychological trick. This morning, they went out of the city to fight the Nanfu soldiers. After a long period of preparation, the victory of this battle was a matter of course. Tens of thousands of enemy soldiers were captured, and numerous war horses and weapons were obtained. The remaining small portion of Yudo fled in panic. At this point, the situation in Yunzi was set. It was rare for the Nanfu soldiers to celebrate in the city. From spring to autumn, close to half a year had passed. Although it looked easy, only they knew that the days were tough. Yunzi was near the ocean, and the nights were humid. Many soldiers had red rashes on their bodies, and once night fell, they would feel unbearably itchy. There was also army grain, which was not enough for them to eat. The buckets of white rice that the Yudo saw every day were actually the same buckets. "We can finally go home." A slightly younger Nanfu soldier grinned. "I've spent enough time in Yunzi, so I'm going back to the capital." Chiwu walked past him and wanted to scold him. However, when the words reached his mouth, he did not say anything. Instead, he let out a smile. To be able to go home alive, just hearing about it made one happy. Within the tent, the military doctor was treating the injuries of the main general. The young man's shirt was pulled down to his shoulders, and his chest was wrapped in a thick cloth. Since he was the commander of the Right Army, he was naturally the target of all the attacks from the Yudo. He was injured in the end. However, the black armor covered his wound, so no one saw him bleeding. Hence, people always thought that General Fengyun would not be injured. "Commander, don't do anything too serious these few days," the white-bearded old military doctor reminded. "Although the arrow did not hit any vital parts, the wound is very deep. It's best to rest for a few days to prevent any problems in the future." Xiao Ju pulled his outer robe over his wound and nodded. "Thank you." Just as the old military doctor left, someone came in. It was Fei Nu. He held a letter in his hand and walked over quickly. He had a rare, anxious expression. "Young master, there's a letter from Ji County." Ji County was far away from Yunzi. When the letter was sent, a few days had already passed. The last time they received a letter from Ji County, it was when they learned of Yanhe's death. Zhuchuan had already received the news that Ji County had lost its main general. Yan had led the Fuyue army to help. This time, the letter was sent after Yan had arrived at Ji County. Fei Nu passed the letter to Xiao Ju. His expression was ugly. Although he did not open the letter, he had already heard the news from the person who delivered the letter. It was not good news. Ji County was easy to defend and hard to attack. The Yan army had lost their main general, and their morale was not stable. If they did not end the war quickly, it would only be disadvantageous to the Wei. Yan brought 2,000 soldiers and horses and pretended to surrender to enter the city in an attempt to break through the Yudo's formation. When the city was in chaos, He would take the opportunity to open the city gates and let the Fuyue army and the rest of the Yin army work together to kill the Yudo. There were no problems with the plan. Unfortunately, during the execution of the plan, one of the Yin army soldiers could not resist the provocation of the Yudo and attacked. The plan was disrupted. He Yin led the Dowei soldiers to fight with the Yudo. Although they opened the city gates and won the battle, He Yin was seriously injured and his situation was not good. Xiao Ju stared at the letter in front of him. The letter was written by Lin Shuanghe. The handwriting was very messy. It could be seen that when he wrote the letter, the situation was very urgent. Although the higher-ups did not say how bad the situation was, it was easy to imagine. 2,000 soldiers entered the city. If they attacked first, it would be like a sheep entering a tiger's den. They did not have any weapons and were already at a disadvantage. Furthermore, it was difficult for 2 fists to fight against 4 hands. What was more serious was that although they won the battle, once the Yudo knew that their general was injured, they would definitely counterattack. Lin Shuanghe did not understand the situation of the battle. The letter was also unclear. He did not know what the situation was like. Fei Nu looked at Xiao Ju's expression. Honestly speaking, this letter came at the wrong time. The battle at Yunzi only needed to be wrapped up. This letter would definitely cause Xiao Ju to panic. But Yunzi and Ji County were not in the same direction. Even if they turned around and went to Ji County to help, they would not be able to make it in time. They could only watch helplessly. How difficult was that? Young master, should we go to Ji County? No need. Xiao Ju interrupted him. Fei Nu did not dare to speak. Xiao Ju stood up and walked out of the tent. Outside, the west wind blew against his face. It was almost the beginning of autumn. All the heat in the night had faded away, leaving only the cold air. In the distance, the sea was vast and the sound of the waves was fierce. The clear moon reflected in the clouds and dyed the sea white. The night at the border had always been like this. The sun was cold and the grass was short. The moon was bitter and white. But what was the difference between the moonlight in the desert and the moonlight by the sea? There was a faint pain in his chest. He did not know if it was a wound or something else. He looked up and quietly looked at the cold moon in the sky. A woman's clear voice floated in his ears. I want you to promise me that if there is news, no matter what it is, do what you have to do. Do not affect the overall situation. Do not stop. Continue to move forward. Continue to move forward. After a while, he retracted his gaze and turned to walk in the direction of the tent. The deputy general went forward and asked hesitantly, Commander-in-Chief, next, after daybreak, head north to clean up the remaining soldiers, he said. The summer heat in Jiang was finally blown away by the autumn wind and rain. In the morning, under the parasol tree outside the palace hall, a thick layer of golden leaves fell into the pond. Occasionally, fish swam to the surface of the water and lightly poked at the leaves before quickly swimming away. Only the ripples created by the fish's tails were left. Mu Hongjin walked into the courtyard. A servant said, Your Highness, Lord Chui is here. Chui Yuezhi walked in from outside. He had lost a lot of weight over the past few days and looked more energetic than before. When Yudo invaded Da Wei's territory, Jiang City's army was not strong. Previously, because of Xiao Ju and He Yin, they won despite being outnumbered. Now, Xiao Ju and He Yin had gone to their respective battlefields. Although Jiang City was safe now, the previous incident was a lesson. After the end of the year, Chui Yuezhi stayed in the training field every day to train Jiang City's army. He wanted to be strong and confident when facing the enemy if they came one day. He bowed to Mu Hongjin and handed her a scroll. Your Highness, this is the battle report from Ji County and Yunzi. Mu Hongjin reached out and took it. She had also aged a little, but now she did not let the servant pull out the new white hair on her head every day. Therefore, there were specks of white in her hair. However, she did not care. Mu Xiaolu had gradually grown up, and Jiang City would be handed over to the new princess sooner or later. Everyone would grow old, and growing old shouldn't be such a scary thing. She opened the scroll and looked at the words on it for a long time. Then, she closed the scroll and sighed. Jiuchuan and Yunzi had been taken back. Everything is fine in Bingjiang. There's also good news from Ji County. Your Highness, are you worried about Missy? Chui Yuezhi asked. Hian's life and death were unknown. This was indeed a matter of concern. Chui Yuezhi still remembered the last time he saw Hien. When she was not holding a weapon, she was like an ordinary girl. She loved to smile brightly and was very bright. When she picked up a weapon, it was as if she was born for the battlefield. Although at that time, they were very clear that Hien was not an ordinary girl. When they heard that she led the Fuyue army to Jiuquan alone, they could not help but be shocked. That young General Fei Hong was also a girl, but the 1 in 10,000 woman in that world was no longer in this world. How lucky they were to be able to see another person in their lifetime. But now, could it be that this female general was also going to fall early like General Fei Hong? The woman dressed in a wide-sleeved red robe gently shook her head. Her gaze was a little disappointed. This highness just did not want, she did not want to see a lover like her, unable to have a good ending. It was too difficult to have a perfect ending in this world. She was already like this, so she really did not want to see the disciple of her sweetheart embark on the path of separation between heaven and earth like her. In the Buddhist temple in Rendezvous City, the golden Buddha looked kindly at all living beings. The women in the temple were kneeling on the haystacks, closing their eyes and praying for blessings for people far away. These were the female captives that Yin rescued from Yudo during the battle in Rendezvous City. If Yin had not stopped them at that time, they would have been a pile of bones by now. They would not be alive today. Since Yin left the Rendezvous City, the county magistrate of Rendezvous City, Zhao Shiming, was entrusted by Yin to help take care of these women. Most of them were not recognized by their families. Some of them even thought that their families had died in the hands of Yudo. Zhao Shiming found an embroidery workshop in the city for them to do embroidery work on a daily basis to make a living. For these women, being able to do so was already a pleasant surprise. Although they had not completely walked out of their inferiority complex, in the end, they already had the courage to face the future again. When the news that Ian led the troops to help Ji County and was seriously injured spread to the Rendezvous City, these women were all burning with anxiety. They only wished that they were men and could go to the battlefield together with the heroine to kill the enemy. Now, they could only pray for Hien in the temple. They prayed that the young and brave girl would recover soon and return safely. Outside the temple, the county magistrate who was dressed in a long robe sighed. Look, they are so sincere. In their hearts, they really respect Xiao He. Beside him, Li Kuang looked at the women in the temple and did not speak. It had been almost a year since Luo passed away. Even so, sometimes when he spoke or did something, he would subconsciously look for that delicate figure. Countless nights, he would wake up from his dreams. He would always remember that day when Luo looked at him. There was no resentment, only doubt and confusion. Ian was right. He was indeed wrong. Therefore, from then on, until now, he had spent more time training the Rendezvous City army. The mistake he made could not be made up for. The only thing he could do was to prevent such a mistake from happening again. Lord Li has seen it now. They have survived and are living well, Zhao Shiming said. When Hien saved these women, everyone thought that she was just wasting her energy. Because women who had been humiliated by the enemy, even if they were lucky enough to survive, they would not be able to fight against the eyes of the world. The criticism and ridicule behind their backs would be the last straw that broke their backs. Leaving this world was their choice sooner or later. Before Ian left, she told Zhao Shiming how to settle these women. She even left a sum of money for herself. She was sincerely thinking for these women. And now, these women did not let her down. Li Kuang lowered his head and laughed self-deprecatingly. I am not as good as her. How many people in this world can be compared to Xiao He? Zhao Shiming stroked his beard. I hope that Xiao He can turn misfortune into fortune in Ji County. If she is here, these women will have a place to belong in their hearts. Zhao Shiming looked at the distant sky. A group of autumn geese flew by. He looked for a while and said in a low voice, I hope so. Chapter 266. A long time had passed. After the spring and the mid-autumn, The wind was getting colder and colder. Winter was coming. Yudo had been completely defeated, and in the next 10 years, it would be impossible for him to have any thoughts about Dawei. Jiuquan, Ji County, Yunzi, and Bingjiang sent the news back to Shuo, and countless people celebrated. Amidst the excitement and joy, there were also some sad events. For example, the death of Lieutenant General Guide Yin Nanguang in battle. When the news reached Shuo and the Yin family, Yin He's mother fainted on the spot, and his wife, Xia Chengxiu, went into labor early. Probably because she was heartbroken, the labor was extremely dangerous, and even the midwives were helpless. At the moment of life and death, Lin Shuang's father, Lin Mu, rushed over with his female disciple and personally helped Xia Chengxiu deliver the baby. Everyone in the Yin family gathered outside the delivery room, and when they heard the weak voice of the woman inside and saw the basin of blood being carried out, they couldn't help but be shocked. Master Yin, who had never believed in Buddhism, went to his ancestral hall and knelt on the ground to pray for the safety of the mother and son. In the room, Xia Chengxiu's forehead was covered in sweat, and her expression was pained. She could only feel the strength in her body slowly disappearing. Even as she was dying, she could still feel the pain in her heart. The pain in her heart was greater than all the pain in front of her, and it made it difficult for her to even breathe. And he had died in battle. As the wife of a general, from the day she married Yan He, she should have been prepared for this day. War was cruel, and the battlefield was constantly changing. No one could guarantee that they would be the one to survive. Xia Chengxiu had thought countless times that since she had decided to become his wife, when the day came, she should be calm and magnanimous. Even if her heart was filled with unwillingness, she should be able to withstand the hardships on her face. However, when the day came, she realized that she was weak. She was weaker than she thought. In the eyes of outsiders, that man who was fierce, bad-tempered, and liked to provoke her had never said a harsh word to her. Ever since they got married, Xia Chengxiu was grateful to the heavens. This marriage was indeed a happy one that she had never imagined. However, the good things in the world were not firm, and the colorful clouds scattered easily. It was because it was too perfect that it was so short. While she was in a daze, she seemed to see a familiar figure in front of her. It was Yin He in his silver robe and long spear. He seemed to have returned from the outside and was covered in dust. His eyes were fixed on her, and there was a familiar smile on his lips. It was a little proud and a little boastful. Just like in the past, he had returned after winning a battle. And he extended a hand towards him. Xia Chengxiu stared at him in a daze, subconsciously wanting to place her hand in his. The female doctor beside her saw her expression and was shocked. She shouted, "Madam Yin, hold on, don't fall asleep, don't be discouraged." Then she looked at the curtain and said anxiously, "Master, Madam Yin can't hold on." Lin Mu's heart tightened behind the curtain. He couldn't care about anything else and shouted, "Madam Yin, think about the child in your belly. Don't you want to see what he looks like? Don't you want to be with him as he grows up? Madam Yin, even if it's for your child, you have to be strong. Child?" It was as if a clear hole was torn open in the chaos. "Child! Muxia!" She suddenly opened her eyes. This was her and Yenhi's child. Before Yenhi left, he had sincerely apologized to her belly for not being able to stay by her side. He hoped that it would be a young lady, but if it was a young master, he would love it just as much. Just as he had guessed countless times what the child would look like in the future, Xia Chengxiu had also described the child's features many times. If he was a young master, he would look like Yenhi with thick eyebrows, big eyes, and high spirits. If he was a young lady, he would be like her, gentle, delicate, obedient, and cute. She hadn't even seen the child. How could she let go and leave? She couldn't. Xia Chengxiu suddenly sobered up. She couldn't. At least, she couldn't wallow in her sorrow now. She was Yenhi's wife. She was also his mother. Wah! A baby's cry sounded in the courtyard of the Yin family. Master Yin, who was praying in the ancestral hall with his hands clasped together, was stunned. Then tears flowed down his face. The female doctor smiled and said, "Congratulations, Madam Yin, it's a young master." Lin Mu, who was behind the curtain, suddenly heaved a sigh of relief. When the news from Ji County came, he also felt sad for Yin He. Lin Shuanghe couldn't save Yin He, but at least he saved his child. Xia Chengxiu was exhausted. Her sweat-soaked hair stuck to her cheeks. In a daze, she saw Yin He again. The man smiled warmly, as if he was a little apologetic. He said to her, "I'm sorry." Xia Chengxiu's tears gushed out. She reached out and tried to grab the person in front of her, but he smiled. "Chengxiu, I'm leaving." Nan Guang. The man turned around and strode forward. His back was elegant and neat. As he walked, his figure completely disappeared from her sight. When Xia Chengxiu gave birth to her son, Xiao Ju returned to the capital with the Nanfu army. Emperor Zhaokong was very happy and rewarded her countless times. The courtiers secretly thought that the new emperor wanted to put General Feng Yun in an important position. Now that Su Jingfu was no longer around, the Xiao family in Wei would rise again in the future. The courtiers had their own thoughts, but the common people didn't think so much. They only thought that General Feng Yun was General Feng Yun. Yunzi was in danger, but she still won. Not long after Xiao Ju returned to the capital, General Hui also led his army back from Bingjiang. At this point, only the Fuyue army led by He Yin and the Yin family army had not returned. However, although they hadn't returned, everyone knew that it was only a matter of time. After all, Jiuquan and Ji County had already been recovered. Calculating the time, they should be on their way back to the capital. He Yinsheng woke up even earlier every day. Other than going to school, he would wake up before dawn and climb up Dongwang Mountain to chop firewood. He Yinsheng didn't have to work so hard to make a living now. He chopped firewood not for the sake of living, but to improve his skills. If one day his skills were better than He Yan's, then when He Yin went to the battlefield in the future, he could go with him. Every day after school, he would run to the Xiao family. Every day, when he saw Xiao Ju, the first thing he asked was, "Brother-in-law, is there any news about my sister?" Xiao Ju always shook her head and said no. No, what a depressing answer. Ji County won the battle, but He Yinsheng also learned that He Yin was seriously injured during the battle. After that, there was no more news. Even if there was a message, it didn't explain He Yan's situation. He Yinsheng resisted telling He Sui about this. He Sui was old, and he was afraid that He Sui would be worried every day if she knew about this. However, He Yinsheng still hoped for good news every day. Not long after, Bai Rongwei also gave birth to a daughter. Xiao Jing was very happy. Because of the Xiao family's accident, Bai Rongwei's body became ill, and this pregnancy was especially difficult. Now that both mother and daughter were safe, it was a good thing. Cheng Li Su and Song Tao Tao came to visit Bai Rongwei with many gifts. Xiao family was very popular in Emperor Zhaokong's eyes, and the relatives of the past remembered their old relationship. Cheng Li Su asked the servants of the Xiao family to take care of the cloth and tonics sent by his mother. He looked around and didn't see Xiao Ju, so he asked Xiao Jing, "Eldest uncle, is little uncle not in the residence?" He hadn't seen Xiao Ju for a long time. Xiao Jing was startled. He should be in the ancestral hall at this time. Cheng Li Su stood up and said, "I'll go find him." Then he ran away. He had a close relationship with Xiao Ju, so Xiao Jing and Bai Rongwei were used to it. Song Tao Tao, on the other hand, waited until Cheng Li Su ran away and asked Bai Rongwei, "Young Mistress Xiao, is there any news about Lord He?" Bai Rongwei heard this and sighed, shaking her head. Song Tao Tao was a little disappointed. On the other hand, Cheng Li Su ran to the entrance of the ancestral hall. The weather was getting colder. The fallen leaves in the courtyard were falling, and a layer of frost had accumulated on the roof tiles. He tiptoed inside and saw a young man standing in front of the memorial tablet in the middle of the ancestral hall. His dark blue robe made him look cold and distant. His gaze was calm and peaceful as he looked at the memorial tablet. Cheng Li Su suddenly remembered a summer afternoon many years ago when the thunderstorm was endless. He was also like this. In order to chase a cat, He accidentally hid here and accidentally bumped into the heart of a cold and emotionless youth, the gentleness that was hard to see in the world. The young man's voice sounded, "Why are you hiding behind me?" Chung Li Su was surprised that he had been discovered. He walked in obediently and called out, "Uncle." Xiao Ju didn't look at him. It was a habit he had since he was young. Whenever he felt uneasy or irritated, he would walk here and light 3 sticks of incense. After 3 sticks of incense, everything would go on as usual. His uneasiness and fear couldn't be seen by outsiders. Just like now, under the seemingly calm surface, there were turbulent waves. "Uncle, are you worried about Aunt?" Chung Li Su asked. Xiao Ju was silent. After a long time, so long that Chung Li Su thought Xiao Ju wouldn't answer him, Xiao Ju said, "Yes." Chung Li Su looked at him. "I just want her to be safe and sound." Coming out of Bai Rongwei's room, Song Taodao felt a little depressed. She was also worried when she heard about Hien. Even though she had been secretly distressed for a long time because of the fact that Hien was a woman, but now, those were all things of the past. In all fairness, even if Hien was a woman, she actually liked Hien very much. Death was fair to everyone. That was why the battlefield was so cruel. When one truly realized the cruelty, one would begin to grow up. The biggest worries of a carefree young girl in the past were that her hairpin didn't look good today, and her new lipstick was too dull. Now, she finally understood the feeling of helplessness. Perhaps she was also beginning to grow up. A young man in green walked towards her. His features were delicate and arrogant, and he was somewhat similar to the cheerful and lively young girl. Song Taodao stopped in her tracks. Hey, she remembered this young man. He was Hien's younger brother. His temperament was completely different from Hien's, but the determination in his eyes were especially similar. Hien also saw her. She seemed to be a young lady from a rich family that Hien met in the Liang province guard. Perhaps she was a guest of the Xiao family. He came to the Xiao family today to inquire about Hien. Of course, he didn't hear what he wanted. He forgot Song Taodao's name. He only nodded slightly as a greeting and was about to walk past. "Hey!" Song Taodao instinctively called out to him. Hien stopped in his tracks and looked up. "Miss, is there anything else?" Song Taodao pursed her lips and thought for a moment before saying, "Don't worry. Marquis Wuan will definitely return safely." Hien was startled, as if he didn't expect her to say this. After a moment of silence, he said to her, "Thank you." Then he turned and left. Song Taodao looked at his back. She didn't know if he was looking at the person walking away or at herself. She whispered to herself, "She will definitely return." It was snowing all night. The fruits on the pomegranate tree in front of the window had turned red at some point. They fell on the branches, and the shadow of the tree was like a remnant of red. The little girl, Bai Gua, stood under the tree. Early in the morning, she was drooling as she looked at the biggest and reddest pomegranate on the branches. The second young master's courtyard was cold and cheerless. The most lively thing was this pomegranate tree. The biggest pomegranate was like a small lantern. It looked very sweet. Qing Mei walked past. Seeing Bai Gua's infatuated expression, she couldn't help but lightly knock on Bai Gua's head. Greedy, Bai Gua smacked her lips. Just as she was about to speak, she looked up and saw Xiao Ju walking out. She hurriedly said, "Young master." Xiao Ju glanced at her. "What's the matter?" Bai Gua pointed at the tree. "Look, the pomegranate has turned red." Xiao Ju turned his head to look. The fruits on the tree added a thin layer of color to the green, like a lamp burning in the night. "It's so red. It must be very sweet," Bai Gua said as she bit her finger. Qing Mei couldn't help but whisper, "The young master wants to leave the sweetest pomegranate for the young mistress." "What are you looking at?" Bai Gua explained in a low voice. "I know. I just wanted to ask if the smallest one could be left for us." Her voice gradually trailed off. In the end, she didn't dare to finish her sentence. Xiao Ju walked to the side of the pomegranate tree. Suddenly, she recalled a time last year. There was a girl who stood under this pomegranate tree and tried her best to pick the pomegranates on the tree. Later on, the matters in the capital piled up like a mountain. She didn't have time to pick the biggest pomegranate, and it was already ripe on the branch. She regretted it for a long time. Now, The time was just right, but the person who picked the pomegranate had not returned. He casually picked up a stone under the tree and looked at the farthest tip of the tree. With a slight movement of his fingers, the stone flew towards the tip of the tree. The fiery red pomegranate that looked like a lantern fell into his palm. It was heavy and bright red. He withdrew his hand. At this time of the year, pomegranates should be placed in the well in the courtyard and soaked in cold water. This way, when Yin returned, it would be just right. Xiao Ju was about to leave when Shi Wu ran in from outside. He was panting as he said, young master, the Fuyue army has returned to the capital." Qing Mei and Bai Guo were stunned. Then they became happy. Just as they were about to speak, they raised their heads and felt a strong wind sweep past them. When they looked at the courtyard again, Xiao Ju was already gone. Only the pomegranate tree that bore fruit was more beautiful than the winter plum blossoms. The city gate was already filled with commoners who had rushed over after hearing the news. They blocked both sides of the street. Most of the people who came to welcome them were those whose family members had joined the army. Many women held their young children's hands and stood in the wind, carefully looking for familiar faces in the crowd. If they saw a family member who was still alive, they would ignore the situation and rush over to hug the person's head and cry. There were also old men who shakily came out with crutches. They looked at the crowd from head to toe until their eyes turned cold with disappointment. A war, countless families were torn apart. Separation and reunion, joy and tears, tragedy and comedy, without exception, were played out one by one. When Xiao Ju arrived, the army had already passed through the city gate. The number of soldiers and horses that had set out before was now reduced by half. Everyone's face was filled with fatigue and joy. However, at the front, there was no familiar hardy figure riding on a horse. His gaze suddenly froze. When returning to the capital, the chief general who had performed meritorious deeds would always be at the front. There had never been an exception, but now there was no one. There was no sign of He Yin. That year, when He Yin was the General Fei Hong, he didn't see him when he returned to the capital. Later, He Yin joked with him, "Xiao Ju, one day, I will definitely let you see my heroic appearance when I return from a victorious battle." But now, from head to toe, there was no sign of her in the long line of soldiers and horses. For many years, perhaps since Xiao Zhongwu and Madame Xiao had passed away, he had never been at such a loss. For a moment, he didn't even know where and when he was. The bustling crowd seemed to be very far away from him. Some people walked by in front of him, but did not notice that this young man who seemed to have lost his soul was the Great Wei's right army commander-in-chief. They were so crowded that the pomegranate in his hand slipped out of his hand and rolled into the crowd without a trace. He seemed to have returned to that night when he was young. All of his calmness suddenly cracked. He was so panicked that he didn't know what to do. It seemed like a long time had passed, but also like not much time had passed. He seemed to understand what he had to do next. He turned around and then froze. There was a young woman leaning against the wall by the street. She was wearing a red warrior's outfit, a green sword at her waist. She was looking at him with a smile. She tossed a red fruit up and down in her hand. It was the pomegranate that he had dropped into the crowd. "Hey!" Seeing him look over, she called out in an indecent manner, "Young master over there, my leg is injured and I can't walk forward anymore. Can I trouble you to walk forward a bit?" The young man's gaze passed through the crowd and focused on her for a long time. Then he walked towards her. Step by step, it was as if he had crossed all of the mountains and seas and finally found his place in the world after a long life. The girl smiled and opened her arms wide, as if asking for a hug. He quickly walked forward and hugged this person tightly in his arms. In that instant, there was silence. Only the two of them in each other's arms became the most long-lasting attachment. In the crowd around them, some were happy, some were crying, some were reunited, and some were parting. They snuggled up to each other under the bustle of the world. Even if there were thousands of things, they couldn't be said. The young man's brocade clothes were like a painting. He gently patted her head. The warmth of his palm made He Yan's eyes burn. Unknowingly, tears fell. "It's been a long time, Military Governor Xiao," she said softly. "In a world of north, south, east, west, birth, and old, It was such a blessing that they could always meet and reunite. Chapter 267. In the end, Dewey won the war against Wu Tuo. After Wu Tuo was defeated, the king of Wu Tuo personally wrote a letter of surrender and ordered the prince and the envoy to come and beg for forgiveness. He promised that in the next 100 years, he would not take the initiative to send troops and form an alliance with Dewey and become a vassal state of Dewey. He also left the prince in Dewey as a hostage to show his allegiance. Emperor Zhaokong was pleased and rewarded the soldiers who led the troops to the battlefield. He even made Marquis Wu and he in a third-rank general and gave her the title of Gui. Henceforth, she was the first female general in the history of the Great Wei dynasty. In the courtyard, He Sui looked at the gifts piled up in front of the door and said worriedly, "The cloth and rice can be stored for a long time, but what about these fruits? We don't have many people at home. I'm afraid they will spoil before we finish eating." He Yunshin glanced at them and said, "Send them to brother-in-law's house. Brother-in-law has many family members. However, father, you are insulting He-Yan's appetite by worrying about whether we can finish eating. How can you talk about your sister like that?" He Sui slapped him to the side and said, "Quickly bring the soup in the kitchen to Yin Yin." He Yunshin rolled his eyes and went to the kitchen in resignation. He Yin was sitting in the room looking at He Yunshin's recent homework. Xiao Ju was sitting beside her. She had trouble walking now, and her leg injury would not heal in a short time. However, she was not someone who could sit down. She was nagged by Ronwei and He Sui 100 times every day. He Yunshin walked in from outside while she was sitting. She held a porcelain bowl in her hands and placed it in front of He Yin. She said unhappily, "Father personally stewed this bone soup for you. Drink it." "Why is it bone soup again?" He Yan's face turned bitter. She was not a picky eater, but she could not stand the bone soup 3 times a day. Looking at the bowl of soup that was bigger than her face, she felt like her stomach was going to burst with oil. "Didn't you hurt your leg? Father said that you can nourish yourself with whatever you eat. You should nourish yourself well." Pausing for a moment, he finally couldn't help but reprimand her. "They say that it takes 100 days to recover from a serious injury. Since your leg is injured, don't run around if you have nothing to do. Why don't you just stay at home and recuperate? His Majesty has already approved your leave. Why don't you take your body seriously?" He nagged on, acting more like a father than He Sui. He Yin couldn't take it anymore and looked at Xiao Ju for help. However, this person clearly saw her predicament, yet he just sat there and drank his tea calmly. After He Yunshin finished speaking, he asked Xiao Ju, "Brother-in-law, do you think I'm right?" Xiao Ju replied slowly, "That's right. Did you hear that, He Yin?" He Yunshin was more confident now that he had someone to back him up. "You should be more sensible. I won't say any more. I'm going to feed Xiang." He Yunshin rattled on and on until he was satisfied. He said, "Finish the soup. Father made it himself. Don't leave a single drop behind." Then he went out. He and saw him go out and stared at the bowl of soup in front of him. Finally, he looked at Xiao Ju. "Xiao Ju, no." This person replied heartlessly. He Yin looked at him and felt a headache. "Military Governor Xiao, you are using your position to avenge a private grudge. It's been so long. Why are you still angry?" He raised his eyebrows. "I'm not angry." He Yin looked at him and suddenly remembered that the last time she was angry at Xiao Ju, it was in the Ji County's camp. That was the day she and her 2,000 soldiers pretended to surrender. Some of the Yin army couldn't stand the provocation of the Yudo. In a moment of impulse, they changed the plan. She was in the city, took the Yudo's sword and fought with them. The soldiers outside the city couldn't enter, so someone had to open the city gates. She, Jiang Jiao, and Wang Ba fought as they walked to the city gate tower. Soldiers were never alone in a battle. If they were outnumbered, they would be at a disadvantage. If they ran to the city gate tower, they would become targets. Ian was also injured. Her leg was cut by the Yudo's sword. The wound was so deep that her bones could be seen. With every step she took, the wound pulled at her muscles, and it was painful. Wang Ba and Jiang Jiao were afraid that she wouldn't be able to hold on for long, but she actually held on. The city gates were finally opened, and the soldiers waiting outside the city finally entered. They had won the battle. When Ian got off his horse, he couldn't feel his right leg. After a long time of activity, his pants were stained red with blood. The fabric was stuck to his flesh, and when he tore it off, his skin and flesh were exposed. It was a hair-raising sight. When Lin Shuanghe saw Hian's wound, his face turned pale. He ordered someone to help him into the tent. Hian had lost too much blood. When he fell on the bed, he was so sleepy that he couldn't open his eyes. When he was in a daze, he only had one thought in his mind. It's over, it's over. He didn't go back alive. He broke his promise. Xiao Ju must be angry again. In fact, she wasn't afraid of Xiao Ju being angry. Although Xiao Ju got angry more easily than her, she was still easy to appease. However, she was also afraid that Xiao Ju would really be angry. Hian knew that he had never been angry with her in the past. Lin Shuanghe busied himself in her tent for a day and a night. When Hian woke up, the light in the tent flickered. Someone was leaning against the bed and dozing off. When Hian moved, he woke up. "Hey, Brother Lin." Hian forced a smile. His voice was a little dry. "You can't fool around with a friend's wife. Did you sleep with me for a night?" She was still in the mood to joke. Lin Shuanghe looked at her with a serious expression and said, "Hian, you have to rest." Lin Shuanghe was very dangerous when it came to saving people. It wasn't easy for her to keep her life. However, even though her life was saved, if she did not rest well and continued to jump around like before, then it was very likely that she would not be able to keep her leg in the future. Hian's face was pale. She smiled at him and said, "That won't do. The battle isn't over yet." Just like before Yan he died, even though he knew that intense activity would cause the poison to spread even faster and become a death sentence for him, he still went into battle with his injuries. Hian was the same. It was already the most crucial time. If they didn't seize the opportunity and let the Yudo have a chance to counterattack, it would be very troublesome. "Wrap it up tightly for me," Hian said. "Try not to affect my performance on the battlefield. Aren't you afraid? Your right leg. At most, it's just a cripple." Hian smiled. "Moreover, it's possible that it'll be fine." She struggled to get up. Without any pause, she started to arrange the upcoming battle. Lin Shuanghe once thought that Hian's leg would really be lost. However, Hian was luckier than Yanhe. On the way back from Ji County to Shuajing, Lin Shuanghe used all his knowledge on Hian. In the beginning, Hian's situation was really bad. It was so bad that when Lin Shuanghe wrote a letter, he didn't know where to start. Later, Hian got better. He wrote Hian's situation in his letter. In the end, something happened at the relay station. This made Xiao Ju worried for many days. However, this leg injury had to be taken care of. Hian looked at him and asked, "You're really not angry?" Xiao Ju looked at the tea in front of her attentively. She clutched her chest and said, "Ah, my leg." In an instant, this person looked at her. Seeing that she was pretending, he paused and said, "You're injured on your leg. Why are you clutching your chest?" "It's my leg that hurts, but it's my heart that hurts." Ian looked at him bitterly. "I'm already very hurt, but you're still so cold." Although he knew that this person in front of him could lie easily, he still sighed and sat down in front of her. He asked, "Is it very painful?" Ian said seriously, "Yes, but if you say a few words of concern, it might not hurt anymore." Xiao Ju was speechless. He was so angry that he laughed. Seeing that he laughed, Hian rested her chin on her hand and looked at him. She tugged at his sleeve and said, "All right, Military Governor Xiao, don't be angry. Next time, I'll take good care of myself. I won't joke about my life. This time, I made you worry for so long. It's my fault. I didn't know that something could go wrong at the relay station. She had to take the blame for this." Xiao Ju's gaze fell on her. This person had a cheeky smile on her face and didn't look sad at all. However, she didn't know the fear in his heart when he couldn't find her. He wasn't angry. It was more likely that he felt helpless because he couldn't help her when she was in danger. However, he knew that if he could do it again, Hian would still make the same choice. If it was him, he would also do the same. But she was still here. Being able to play happily in front of him was already a blessing from the heavens. It was enough. After a while, he looked at Hian and smiled. "Okay." Yin was overjoyed. That's right, but I won't help you finish this bowl of soup. Yin said, Xiao Ju, you're really petty. 2 days later, Yin and Xiao Ju went to see Xia Qingxiu. Yin originally thought that he would see a sad and depressed girl. However, to his surprise, Xia Qingxiu actually looked pretty good. When Yin saw her, she was shaking a small red drum and playing with a baby in a bamboo basket. The baby's eyes were open and his eyes were following the movements of the small drum. He was babbling something that no one knew what he was saying. Xia Qingxiu was amused by him and laughed. Yin called out, Miss Qingxiu. Xia Qingxiu saw her and was surprised for a moment. Then he said, Miss He. Xia Qingxiu had lost a lot of weight and his clothes looked very loose. However, his complexion was still good. He wondered if it was because he had become a mother, but he had become more gentle. He had originally thought about how to comfort her and make Xia Qingxiu feel better. Now that he saw her, he realized that the words he had prepared were useless. Miss Qingxiu, how have you been these days? He had thought for a long time and finally asked this question. I've been fine. Xia Qingxiu smiled and said, With Mu Xiao by my side, the days haven't been too hard. Yin felt a little sad when he heard this. Xia Qingxiu looked at her and smiled instead. Miss He, don't be sad for me. When I first heard about Yin He's news, I couldn't accept it. I even thought about leaving with him. However, now that I have Mu Xia, my original obsession has gradually dissipated. When I married Yin He, I knew that there might be a day like this. I just didn't expect it to come so early. She lowered her head and smiled. But since I've made my choice, there's nothing to say. Yin He is already gone, and the living have to live a good life. She looked at Mu Xia in the basket. I think that God is not too cruel to me. At least, I still have Mu Xia. She had lived a clear life. There were some things that Xia Qingxiu understood without Yin saying it. However, Yin thought that sometimes being overly intelligent and sensible might make people feel more sorry for her. She chatted with Xia Qingxiu for a while more before she got up and left. After that, Yin went to Hong Shan's home. Hong Shan was not like Shi Tu and Huang Xiong, who still had a young brother and an old mother at home. Hong Shan's mother cried every day. Yin helped find a school so that his younger brother could go to school. He also helped his mother's family with their expenses. Just as Xia Qingxiu said, the dead were gone, and the people left behind had to live a good life. The only thing she could do for Hong Shan was to take care of his family for him. In the winter, at a restaurant in Linjiang, a flag with the word wine written on it fluttered in the wind. A brawny man carrying a large knife walked up to the woman selling wine and asked in a rough voice, Do you have apricot wine? The woman looked up and saw the scars on the man's face. He looked like a bandit. She was a little scared and whispered, I'm sorry, sir. We don't have apricot wine in the winter. We only have rice wine. She thought that this fierce man would be angry. She didn't expect him to just say, 3 bowls of rice wine. He put the money on the table and walked inside. The woman was stunned for a moment. She hurriedly got up and walked to the wine jar to get a wooden spoon. Wang Ba looked at the small winery with a silent expression. Before he came here, he went to the bandit stronghold and gave the reward money he earned to his brothers. He told them not to rob in the future. He saw that the stronghold was now raising fish and living a good life. They shouldn't touch the life of living on the edge of a knife anymore. When he went to Jiuquan, Huang Xiong told him that the apricot wine in this restaurant in Linjiang was particularly sweet and fragrant. He promised to invite him to drink here when he came back from the war. He gladly agreed. But now, he was the only one who came here to drink. Time passed quickly. It didn't leave any traces, but there were traces everywhere. He was no longer as fierce and aggressive as he was when he first entered the army. The children in the stronghold said that he had become much gentler. He didn't know what was going on, but this was good. To them, being able to come back alive was already a blessing from the heavens. 3 bowls of wine were quickly served. It was home-brewed rice wine. The wine looked turbid and suffused with a simple, spicy taste. He raised his head and drank all the wine in the bowl in front of him. From his throat to his lower abdomen, he immediately felt a burning heat. Old brother. He wiped his mouth and exhaled a breath that reeked of alcohol. He didn't know who he was talking to. The wine is good. No one answered him. A moment later, He picked up the remaining 2 bowls of wine and walked to the window. In front of the window, a thin willow swayed in the wind. In the winter, the branches and leaves were bare. But not long after, when spring came, new green would grow here. He turned his hand and poured the 2 bowls of wine into the ground in front of the willow. The wine seeped in little by little. He silently watched for a while, then said in a low voice, "I'll also invite you to try it." In the noodle shop in the east of the city, the busy young girl had changed into a light blue dress. There was a circle of fluffy rabbit fur embroidered on the edge of the dress. Velvet flowers of the same color were inserted into her hair bun, which made her already delicate and pretty face even more delicate. The closer it was to winter, the better the business of the noodle shop became. On a cold winter morning, eating a bowl of piping hot Yangchun noodles in the morning would make one feel warm from the bottom of their heart. Sun Xiaolan was so busy that her feet didn't touch the ground. Only when the last bowl of noodles was delivered could she take a break. She was wiping the sweat on her forehead with a handkerchief when she suddenly saw a familiar figure in the crowd. It was a somewhat dark and handsome young man. As he walked by the street, Sun Xiaolan found him familiar and couldn't help but take a few more glances. Then she remembered that at the beginning of spring this year, she had seen this young man. There was also a handsome young man who was taciturn. After they left a pot of peach blossoms on the table. The young girl's heart suddenly felt a burst of joy. Just as she was about to call out to him, someone behind her said, "Little girl, I'd like another bowl of Yangchun noodles here." Sun Xiaolan responded with her mouth. When she looked up again, she saw that the figure had already disappeared from the crowd. Where'd he go? The urging voice behind her didn't make her think too much. She only thought to herself, forget it. Since these 2 young men are in Shuo capital, there will definitely be a chance to meet them in the future. Who knows, maybe in a few days, they will come to this noodle house. Thinking of this, her heart became happy again. Amidst the hubbub of voices, only the pot of peach blossoms in front of the noodle house's wooden cabinet looked lonely and bleak in the winter. The flower pot was beautifully painted, as if it was a brilliant spring day. The snow pressed down heavily on the eaves. When He Yin came out of the military department, the sky was already dark. Although her leg was injured and Zhaokong Emperor had temporarily allowed her to take sick leave after the Battle of Juchuanji County, the follow-up military affairs were busy. She still had to go to the military department to discuss matters with her colleagues. It was inconvenient for Qing Mei, so when she came out during the day, it was Qi Wu who sent her out. However, she stayed a little longer today. When she came out, it was already very late. She was the only one left in the military department. He Yin came out with a walking stick. Just as he was about to ask someone to find a carriage, he saw a person standing on the steps. She was wearing a bright moonlight embroidered brocade robe. Standing in the snow, it seemed as if the snow was illuminated. "Xiao Ju," He Yin waved at him. He chuckled and walked up to them. "Why are you free today?" He Yin waited for him to come closer before asking. If she was extremely busy in the military department, Xiao Ju was even busier than her. "I know you haven't gone back yet, so I came to pick you up," he said. He Yin hurriedly grabbed his arm. With one hand holding the walking stick, she hopped forward on one leg. She didn't think much of it. Her leg injury was actually much better, but she didn't know what Lin Shuanghe had said to Xiao Ju to exaggerate. In short, He Yin felt that her current life was like a cripple. She took 2 steps forward. Xiao Ju suddenly stopped. He Yin asked, "What's wrong?" His gaze fell on He Yin's walking stick. After thinking for a while, he walked in front of He Yin and squatted down slightly. "Come on up. You want to carry me on your back?" He Yin asked. "Hurry up. That's not good." He Yin hesitated for a while. "This is the military department. I have to work here every day. If someone sees this, it will damage my reputation. Everyone knows how brave and invincible I was in Juchuan. If they look back, they will see that I even need someone to carry me. Wouldn't that be embarrassing? Are you coming up or not?" He Yin said, "Yes, yes, yes." She pounced forward and wrapped her arms around Xiao Ju's neck. Xiao Ju easily carried her on his back. Xiao Ju continued to carry her outside. He Yin whispered in his ear, "Even if you don't care about my reputation, what about yours? Won't others say that although Wei's Commander Jadeface looks impressive, he is actually a henpecked husband at home? Lady Xiao Ju's voice was very calm. You don't have to speak when you don't want to. Yin said, are you admitting that you are a henpecked husband? At times like this, Xiao Ju was usually too lazy to bother with her. The wind blew in the night. It was very cold as they walked on the road. However, his back was warm and broad, as if it could support the entire future. Yin thought that Xiao Ju was indeed better than He Yunsheng. If He Yunsheng had carried her for such a long distance, he would have scolded her and complained that she was heavy. Military Governor Xiao, Yin's voice was soft. Her warm breath blew on his neck, tickling him. Is this your first time carrying a girl? Xiao Ju's voice was very cold. Are you a girl? No one saw that the corners of his mouth were slightly curved, and his eyes were as moving as water. Am I not a girl? Yin asked doubtfully. Then, do you like a man? Xiao Ju did not say anything. Perhaps it was because Yin had been with him for a long time, but his ability to annoy people had grown day by day. Sometimes, Xiao Ju could not win against her in an argument, or perhaps he was too lazy to argue with her. She had won a round and was very proud of herself. The night was quiet. The snow and the moon were silvery white. One end of the street was quiet, while the other end of the street was connected to the night market. The lights were waning. They walked with their backs to the hustle and bustle. Along the way, the broken lights hanging under the eaves illuminated the snowy ground. Plum trees planted in people's backyards were blooming. They stretched out sparsely from the fences, trembling beautifully. The wind and snow came for no reason, but her mood was calm. On the way home, the night was beautiful. She laid on Xiao Ju's back and looked at the moon in the sky. She called out to him, Xiao Ju. Yin responded with an mm. She heard him say, what do you think the moon will be different from now in 10, 20, 50 years? Xiao Ju paused. I don't know. After a while, he answered, I want to see how the moon will be different from now in a few decades. Xiao Ju looked up. The cold moon was like eyebrows, pear blossoms dotting the snow. The voice of the person on her back was gentle and quiet. When she laid on his back, it was reassuring. I want to know, too. His gaze softened. Like the limpid autumn water, he said softly, so let's look at it together. Look at the moon together 10, 20, 50 years. Ian's lips slowly curled up. In the future, what would it be like? Maybe the streets would be different in 10 years. Maybe the snow would be colder in 20 years. Maybe she and Xiao Ju would be white-haired in 50 years. But the moon might not be different from tonight. Even if it was different, it did not matter. 10, 20, 50 years later, the mountains would be long and the rivers would be far away. She did not know the things of the world now, but she knew she would always like the moon. A snowflake landed on the hair of the person in front of her. Ian gently brushed it away. She felt that it was much more normal. The moon was bright and the wind was gentle. Tonight was a good night. Let's go home. She smiled and urged him. Okay. The end of the text. Chapter 268. It was April in the capital, and the weather was getting warmer. By the riverbank, children were flying kites. The lines were very far away, and they were competing with each other to see whose kite was flying higher. Their laughter could be heard outside the long beach, and passers-by stopped to watch. Near the city gate, several carriages were parked. It seemed that some people were leaving the capital, and their relatives came to send them off. Right in front of the carriage, a young man wearing a long robe was rambling nonstop. If one listened carefully, it was all, the journey is long, so you must pay attention to your safety. Yao Yao hates bumps the most, so when you carry her, remember to wrap her in a blanket. He Yun Sheng. The woman opposite him couldn't help but interrupt him. If you keep talking like this, we won't be able to leave when it's dark. That's right, the woman standing beside He Yun Sheng glared at him and looked at He Yin. Sister, don't worry about going to Jiang. Yun Sheng and I will take good care of the family. He Yin nodded and waved to Xiao Yao, who was being carried by Xiao Ju in the carriage, to He Yun Sheng and Song Tao Dao. Xiao Yao shouted in a childish voice, Uncle, Aunt, goodbye. Be good on the road. He Yun Sheng approached Xiao Yao and pinched her small face. He smiled. When we come back, Uncle will buy you candy. Xiao Yao bit her finger and smiled at him. Okay, you can go back, Xiao Ju said. We're leaving. The curtain of the carriage was lowered, and they rushed out of the city. Time passed quickly. It had been 7 years since the battle with Yudo. 7 years was enough for a young man to grow into an indomitable man. He Yinsheng was no longer the young and inexperienced boy who followed He Yin to the streets to sell large cakes. These years, his martial arts were outstanding, and he was willing to work hard. He was lucky enough to gain the favor of Emperor Zhaokong. Step by step, he steadily worked his way up. Now, he had already become the deputy commander of the 5th Battalion. His official position was indeed promoted. When others looked at him, they felt that his temperament was arrogant and distant. But only He Yin knew that He Yunsheng was still the same worrywart as before. With such a temperament, it was hard for Song Taodao to take a fancy to him. He Yunsheng and Song Taodao got married 4 years ago. Her marriage to He Yunsheng was indeed beyond He Yan's expectations. After all, the person who had been engaged to Song Taodao back then was Cheng Lisu. However, back then, Song Taodao and Cheng Lisu did not have any feelings for each other. After a few years, it was still the same. Later, the Song family and the Cheng family annulled the engagement. Originally, it was nothing. Who knew that as soon as the engagement was dissolved, Song Taodao ran to the door of the He family and bravely expressed her love for He Yunsheng, which shocked everyone. Master Song was also a scholar. When he heard the news, he almost fainted from anger. Madame Song also felt that Song Taodao's actions were too outrageous. The only person who supported Song Taodao was her ex-fiancé, Cheng Lisu. Cheng Lisu secretly ran to the door of the Song family's house and encouraged her. Not bad, Miss Song. You finally did something that I admire. Don't mind what others say. My brother, he is one of the top young talents in Shuajing. If you miss this village, you won't have this opportunity again. Don't give up just because of a few words from others. Don't worry, your ex-fiancé. He patted his chest and said righteously, I will definitely help you get what you want. After encouraging Song Taodao, he went to find He Yunsheng. He and once saw Cheng Lisu deceiving He Yunsheng with his own eyes. Uncle He, my ex-fiancé, although spoiled and willful, pretentious, and fierce like a tiger, has nothing good about her. She's a good person. But in fact, her looks are passable. Her family is rich, and more importantly, she is deeply in love with you. Why don't you try to get along with her? Who knows? Maybe they'll develop feelings for each other as time passes. He Yunsheng looked at him coldly. Why don't you get along with her yourself? Hey, He Yunsheng answered very sincerely. A gentleman has the beauty to help others. He Yin, who accidentally heard the whole conversation, thought that Cheng Lisu was really a stick that wanted to see the world in chaos. He Yunsheng didn't like Song Taodao at first. He Yin thought that he knew his brother quite well. According to his brother, the girl he liked should be a gentle and cute girl like Xia Qingxiu or Bai Rongwei. But at first, Song Taodao was the one who stuck to him, but he was stubborn and unmoved. Later on, Song Taodao didn't come to the He family's house. He Yunsheng held it in for a long time. Finally, one day he found He Yin. After being shy for a long time, he said that he wanted her to help him propose marriage to the Song family. He Yin didn't know what to say. From Xiao Ju's niece-in-law to his sister-in-law, Song Taodao's identity was a little too big. He Yin didn't care about what other people said. He just sighed in his heart. Fate really didn't make any sense. Who would have known that at the very beginning, Song Taodao was originally her fiancé? Young people's affairs were hard to predict. Just let them be. After all, the goodies shouldn't flow into the fields of outsiders. Also, most men were people who didn't mean what they said. As for Cheng Lisu, she was still alone at the moment. Because of what happened with Song Taodao, his family didn't dare to arrange a marriage for him. But Cheng Lisu himself didn't take this matter to heart. Every day, he was busy making friends and playing with cats and dogs. He was still the useless young master from before. At first, the Cheng family hoped that he would make progress, but later on, they were too lazy to care. In this world, having a big heart was a kind of happiness. The carriage shook. Xiao Yao hid in Xiao Ju's arms and stared at the scenery outside the carriage. She didn't cry or make a fuss. Her eyes were full of curiosity. Ian snapped his fingers. She suddenly turned her head and stared at Ian without blinking. Her eyes were wet. Ian burst out laughing. Xiao Ju, he was so angry that he laughed. What kind of mother are you? The road ahead is long. Ian didn't think much of it. If we don't find some fun for ourselves, it'll be boring. Xiao Yao was almost 3 years old. When she was born, Lin Shuanghe called his father and grandfather over and asked them to wait at the Xiao family's door in case an accident happened. Fortunately, Xiao Yao's birth went smoothly and Ian did not suffer too much. The little fellow was also very obedient. Her temperament was not as lively as Ian's, nor as calm as Xiao Ju's. Ian felt that she was silly, like a little fool. She was very easy to take care of. She could be happy the whole day with a grasshopper. Because of this, she decided to bring Xiao Yao with her on this trip to Jiang. She was going to Jiang with Xiao Ju to attend Mu Xiaolu's wedding. When she first saved Mu Xiaolu from the hands of criminals in Jiang, Mu Xiaolu was only an 11-year-old girl. Now, she was already a big girl. Not only that, Mu Hongjin also passed the position of princess to her. This time, Mu Hongjin sent an invitation to He Yin and his wife. She hoped that they would come to Jiang to attend the ceremony in person if they were free. Ever since Yudo was defeated, the way was peaceful. Other than training the soldiers and horses, they didn't have much to do every day. He Yin and Xiao Ju asked for leave from Emperor Zhaokong and took Xiao Yao to Jiang. He Yin thought that if Lu Buwang was still alive, he would want to see Mu Hongjin's granddaughter enter a new life. Since Lu Buwang was gone, she would take care of her granddaughter for him. Moreover, she also missed her friends in Jiang. The carriage drove outside the city. There were people selling peaches on the road, so the carriage in front stopped. Ian heard Lin Shuanghe's voice outside. Hey, younger sister it's a long journey. Buy 2 peaches to eat. Fei Nu stopped the carriage in front. Ian got off the carriage. Lin Shuanghe was standing in front of the peach selling peaches, carefully picking the fresh peaches in the bamboo basket. Ian wanted to laugh when he saw this. She leaned against the carriage and said, "Didn't you say that you don't eat the peddler's food outside?" Lin Shuanghe pretended not to hear her and changed the topic. These peaches look good. Buy some for Yao Yao to try. 7 years had passed. Lin Shuanghe had changed from an elegant white-clothed young master to an elegant white-clothed young master who was 7 years older. In fact, there wasn't much difference in appearance. His extravagant personality had never changed. However, 7 years ago, after the Great Battle of Yudo, he was depressed for half a year after returning to the Shuo capital. Later, he opened a medical center in the Shuo capital. The Lin family had many medical centers, but the one he opened was special. Because he didn't treat people, he only taught medicine. The doctors in the Shuo capital who were obsessed with medicine often went to his medical center to study together. In these few years, he had come up with many new recipes. Although Lin Shuanghe's fame couldn't be compared to Lin Qingtan, he had gradually surpassed Lin Mu. He had some achievements in medicine, but his marriage had always been a headache for the Lin family. Although Cheng Lisu was unwilling to get married, she was still younger than Lin Shuanghe. Lin Shuanghe was already Cheng Lisu's uncle. His classmates, such as Xiao Ju, could even run on the ground with their children. He was the only one who was still single. But to say that he was cold and aloof, he couldn't be considered pitiful. All the women in the capital were his little sisters. His medical center was very lively every day. He probably hadn't met a woman who could truly make him fall in love, so he didn't force it. Ian walked to Lin Shuanghe's side and picked peaches with him. The peaches were pink and fresh, sweet just by looking at them. She picked a few and sighed. If only Qingmei was here. Qingmei is the best at picking these fruits. Don't. Lin Shuanghe didn't even think about it before replying. 1 Xiao Huaijin is enough. Do you want me to stay here and watch the master and servant take care of the child together? Then he face-bombed. I didn't think that some men would be like this after becoming fathers. After Xiao Ju had Xiao Yao, whenever they were outside, she wouldn't let go of Xiao Yao. She was also very obedient to Xiao Yao. This wasn't a big deal. In any case, Xiao Yao had a gentle temperament and was easier to take care of. Chi Wu's stinky brat was also a big deal. He caused trouble all day long and was extremely naughty. Every time Qing Mei got angry, she would chase him around the courtyard with a wooden stick, causing chaos every time. However, Chi Wu still wanted to protect him. He said, "The child is still young and doesn't know any better. Don't be so fierce. Put down the wooden stick. If you have something to say, we can talk." The result of this kind of situation was usually Qing Mei beating him up as well. Ian sometimes sighed in amazement. She really didn't think that the weak servant girl who used to cry all the time could be so valiant now. Qing Mei married Chi Wu 3 years after the Battle of Yichuo. Ian always joked about Qing Mei before, but he didn't really take it to heart. Qing Mei liked who she wanted to marry and who she wanted to marry. In the end, it all depended on Qing Mei's own thoughts. However, the two of them were still fated to be together. Both of them liked each other, so it was only natural for them to be together. At first, he had planned to let Qing Mei and Chi Wu go together on this trip to Jiang. However, at this critical moment, they found out that Qing Mei was pregnant and couldn't travel too far. He then asked Qing Mei to rest well in the residence, and Chi Wu to accompany her. He then picked a few peaches. After Lin Shuanghe paid for them, she washed the peaches with clean water from the wooden bucket next to the peddler and returned to her carriage. Here, she handed the peaches to Xiao Ju. "Try it." Xiao Ju took the peaches, peeled them with a knife, and fed them to Xiao Yao. Xiao Yao ate a little and became happy. She said in a childish voice, "I want more." Ian was speechless. Sometimes, she felt that her and Xiao Ju's positions as parents were reversed. She taught Xiao Yao how to walk and even taught her how to hold small stones. She planned to teach her martial arts when Xiao Yao was older, while Xiao Ju took care of all the minor details. For example, what Xiao Yao ate, what she wore, what she played. When it came to taking care of children, the patience he displayed was comparable to Xia Qingxiu. Xia Qingxiu. Mu Xiao was already 7 years old. He looked a lot like Yan He. Among his peers, he was considered to be taller. Although his father had already passed away when he was born, but luckily everyone in the Yan family, as well as Yan He's friends, gave him enough care so that he did not have any inferiority complex or resentment. He was very lively and had a strong desire to win. His archer and horsemaster said that his equestrian skills still needed to be improved, so he trained hard for a full 3 months until he obtained first place in the academy examinations. The last time he saw Mu Xia, the young lad held a long sword and arrogantly said to Xiao Ju, "Military Governor Xiao, in a few years, you will be defeated by this young master." Yan, who was watching from the side, could not help but laugh. Yan Muxiao looked up and saw her. He snorted, "What are you laughing at, including you?" Yan felt that this young lad with a high ponytail, silver robe and long spear was exactly the same as Yan He in the past. Xia Chengxiu laughed. "His character is like this. I have told him many times, but he did not change. Don't mind him." "No, he is very cute." Yan also laughed. "Mu Xia is very similar to Brother Yan." Xia Chengxiu lowered his head. "Yes, everyone says so." Yan felt that Yan Muxiao's character was very good. At least he was lively and could bring Xia Qingxiu a lot of comfort. Other than taking care of Yan Muxia, Xia Chengxiu also went to the academy to help. A few years ago, a new female academy was set up in the Shuo capital. It was run by Wei Xuanzhang's wife, Wei Furen, and Zhaokong Emperor agreed. Now that there was a female general like Marquis Wu in the imperial court in the next few years, when young Su Tang nurtured a group of talented and ambitious girls, who knows if there would be female officials. Although it was slow, it was getting better little by little. He Xining also helped in young Su Tang. After Wei Xuanzhang's death, He Xining accompanied Wei Furen every day and built a deep relationship with Wei Furen. Wei Furen accepted her as her goddaughter. She was a teacher teaching the zither in young Su Tang. Every day, she was with young girls and became more cheerful and open-minded. She was no longer as obsessed with the past as before. Ian also often went to see her. He heard that there was a young teacher teaching abacus in young Su Tang who secretly admired He Xining very much. He ordered people to investigate the background of that teacher. He was a righteous person. However, He Xining had to ask herself what she thought. There was still a long way to go, so there was no hurry. After Xiao Yao ate the peach, she fell asleep on Xiao Ju's body. Ian asked in a low voice, "Are you tired? Do you want me to hold you for a while?" Xiao Ju shook her head. "I'm not tired." Ian looked at Xiao Yao, who was hanging on his body, and sighed in his heart. As expected of her, she could eat and sleep and was especially easy to take care of. She lifted the curtain of the carriage and looked outside. Outside, at the end of the river, the banks were green and the sun was warm. As she looked, she felt a wave of laziness. She leaned on Xiao Ju's shoulder and unknowingly fell asleep like the little girl in Xiao Ju's arms. 7 years later, Jiang City did not seem to have changed much compared to 7 years ago. At the city gate, Cui Yuji, who had received the news, rushed over early in the morning. When He Yin and the others got off the carriage, the first thing they saw was Cui Yuji and his 4 concubines. Cui Yuji still looked the same. He was round and chubby, simple and honest, but he was a little older. Eldest concubine and 4th concubine each held a child in their arms. These were Cui Yuji's son and daughter, Cui Yin and Cui Yingying, who were born to eldest concubine and 4th concubine respectively. 2nd concubine was still as charming and beautiful as before. 3rd concubine coughed weakly every time she took a few steps. There were not many changes either. Ian walked in front of them and pinched Cui Yingying's cheeks. Her cheeks were soft and comparable to Xiao Yao's. He smiled and said, "Lord Cui, this is Yin'er," and Yingying. Cui Yuji said proudly, "How is it?" "Everyone says that the 2 of them look more and more like military governor Xiao." "I think they do." Ian, although he admitted that Cui Yin and Cui Yingying had delicate features and did not look like Cui Yuji, he did not think that they would be related to Xiao Ju. Cui Yuji's eyes lit up when he saw Xiao Yao in Xiao Ju's arms. "Aya, this must be Xiao Yao. She's so cute. She and Yin are a golden couple. How about—" Xiao Ju blocked his hand that was about to reach out. She glanced at him coldly and said calmly, "Cui Yuji." 2nd concubine hurriedly held Cui Yuji and said with a smile, "Master, you really like to joke. Miss Xiao is still young." Xiao Yao looked at Cui Yuji in confusion, then looked at Xiao Ju. Finally, she reached out to He Yin and asked for a hug. "Mother!" He Yin carried her over. Lin Shuanghe stood up and coughed softly. "This is not the place to talk. Master Cui, let's go back to the residence first." Cui Yuji's residence was huge. He stayed in the Cui residence like last time when he came to Jiang. However, when he came back last time, He Yin and Xiao Ju still had a clear superior-subordinate relationship. Now that they were going back to their old home and were already husband and wife, they even brought along a little child. It was really unpredictable. Ian walked behind with Xiao Yao in his arms. He looked at Cui Yuji curiously and asked softly, "Since 1st concubine and 4th concubine have already given birth to Master Cui's children, why are they still Master Cui's concubines? If that's the case, won't young Master Cui and young Miss Cui become illegitimate children?" She originally thought that since Cui Yuji only had 4 concubines, he might still marry a wife in the end. However, after so many years, he did not marry. Even his concubines had given birth to children. Ian did not understand. "Master Xiao, you don't know?" Cui Yuji said with a smile. "Jiang and the Central Plains have different customs. Women in Jiang rarely remarry once they get married. If something happens to their husband's family, and they are unfortunate enough to be widowed, they have to be widowed for the rest of their lives. As a cavalry officer, I don't know when I will die in my early years. Marrying a wife is a hindrance to others. Concubines are different. Even if I die, they can still find a place to live. Who knows that I have a good life? I have lived, well, all these years. However, I am also used to the 4 of them. If one of them becomes the main wife, will there still be peaceful days in the courtyard? This is also quite good." Cui Yuji sighed. "I treat everyone equally. Everyone is my favorite. They are all illegitimate children, so there is no difference between them." Ian had nothing to say. He could only say that Cui Yuji was indeed a man who had walked Lover's Bridge 4 times. Although his perspective was strange, he had his own logic. When they arrived at the Cui residence, a middle-aged housekeeper came to welcome them. Lin Xuanhe asked, "Where is Zhong Fu?" He remembered that the last time he came to the Cui residence, the housekeeper was an old servant with white hair. Zhong Fu passed away a year ago, Cui Yuji said. He was old and passed away in his dreams. This is Zhong Fu's son, Zhong Gue. Ian was a little absent-minded. It was only at this moment that he truly felt that 7 years had passed. No matter how similar Jiang was to the past, it was not 7 years ago. Cui Yuji had already ordered people to clean the courtyard before they came. Ian and the others settled the things. Xiao Yao was already asleep. Ian placed her on the bed and covered her with a blanket. He looked around the room and suddenly remembered that she was looking at the spring pictures that Cui Yuji had painstakingly arranged for them in front of this bed. Xiao Ju glanced at her and saw Yin standing by the bed with a thoughtful smile. She raised her eyebrows and said, "Lady He, are you regretting that Cui Yuji did not put the pictures here this time?" Yin came back to his senses and shook his head. "How can that be? After all, Yao Yao is still here. Lord Cui still knows his limits." She really showed a regretful expression, as if she had not had enough. Xiao Ju was angry and amused at the same time. Although Xiao Yao was almost 3 years old, Hian's skin was getting thicker and thicker by the day. Perhaps it was because he was training new recruits in the martial arts field and spent all day with those youths. He was getting bolder and bolder, and he had fewer misgivings. She saw that Xiao Yao was sleeping soundly and whispered, "I'm a little hungry. Let the maidservant come over and look after Yao Yao. Let's go eat something first." Xiao Ju nodded. The Cui residence's food was as exquisite as usual. During the meal, Hian talked about Mu Xiaolu's husband. Cui Yuji said, "I've seen the eldest son of the Qin family. He's handsome and has good skills. Previously, when the little highness sneaked out to play, she encountered bad people. It was the eldest son of the Qin family who saved her. The little highness has good taste. In Jiang City, a handsome man like the eldest son of the Qin family is rare." When Cui Yuji looked at people, he would first look at their appearance. However, Hian also knew that there was nothing wrong with this eldest son of the Qin family. She had ordered Bai Xian to investigate. A few years ago, Wanning had been injured while on a mission. It was not good for her to work everywhere. Coincidentally, Bai Xian had grown up and took over Luan Ying's job. He had a lively personality and completed his mission very well. He also liked Hian very much, especially Hian's embroidery. Every once in a while, he would ask Hian for one. There was a period of time when he asked too much, which made Xiao Ju unhappy. She found an opportunity to send him to a place far away to do some work. Hian did not like needlework, but in this world, it was not easy to meet someone who appreciated her. Especially when Bai Xian praised her needlework from the bottom of his heart every time. Hian would try his best to satisfy Bai Xian's requests. According to Bai Xian's information, this young master of the Qin family was an upright gentleman and a good man who could be entrusted with her life. In Xiao Ju's opinion, Hian was worrying for nothing. After all, Mu Xiaolu was going to get married. Mu Hongjin would definitely have investigated the background of the eldest son of the Qin family a long time ago. However, Hian always felt that Mu Xiaolu was the grandson of Lu Buwang's lover. It was reasonable for her to do her best. At the wedding banquet tomorrow, you will see what he looks like. As Cui Yuji spoke, he sighed, "The little highness is grown up now. His decisive appearance is exactly the same as his highness in the past. We old men are also old. In the future, it will be the young people's world." Second concubine said sweetly, "Master is not old. It's called being upright and prudent." Hian, what a good upright and prudent. After the meal, they chatted for a while. Xiao Yao also woke up. First concubine ordered the kitchen to make food suitable for children. Hian and Xiao Ju fed Xiao Yao. When Xiao Yao was full, they played with her. When the sky darkened, Fourth Inyang knocked on the door. Hian walked out and heard Fourth Inyang say, "Miss He, This concubine will go to Shui City later to buy the red silk that will be tied to the congratulatory gift tomorrow. Would you like to go and pick some together? The red silk of Jiang is not the same as the one in the Central Plains. He turned his head and asked Xiao Ju, "Do you want to go with me? There are too many people. It's inconvenient for Yao Yao." After a pause, Xiao Ju said, "You go. I'll come find you after I coax her to sleep." Xiao Yao always needed someone to coax her before she slept. At first, it was Yin who coaxed her, until one day, Xiao Ju heard her telling Xiao Yao a bedtime story. A heroine chopped off a bandit's head with a knife. The head rolled in front of the heroine. Xiao Yao blinked and stared at her, listening with great interest. After that, Xiao Ju did not let Yin coax Xiao Yao to sleep. Yin said to fourth concubine, "All right, we'll go first." Fourth concubine smiled and said, "All right." Jiang City, Shui City, was still bustling with activity. The Water God Festival had passed, but the peddlers and merchants did not leave. In the past 2 years, Jiang City Pass was more open than before. Many merchants came to Jiang to do business, and Shui City became more and more prosperous. Goods from the western regions to Jiangnan could be seen. Fourth concubine was the youngest, about the same age as Yin. As they walked, she explained to Yin, "The city is different from before." Does Lord Xiao, he also feel that it's much more lively than before? Yin sighed, "That's true. On the river, boats of all sizes were brightly lit, illuminating both sides of the river, as if it was daytime. The peddlers worked hard to sell their goods. Yin walked and stopped. Occasionally, he saw something new, so he bought it with the intention of giving it to Xiao Yao to play with later. She was no longer a poor soldier. In any case, she had a salary. Just the rewards she received from the battle that year were enough to fill her courtyard. In the past few years, although her purse was not full, it was not as flat as a pancake like it used to be. As the two of them walked, from time to time, youths from Jiang would pass by. They could not help but glance at Yin. Yin noticed their gazes and asked fourth concubine, "Is there something on my face?" Fourth concubine giggled and explained, "That's not it, Lord Xiaohe. They admire Lord Xiaohe because of his good looks." Yin covered his mouth with his hand and coughed softly. "You flatter me." Fourth concubine smiled, but did not say anything. The men of Jiang could not tell the difference between the hairstyles of women in the Central Plains and young girls. They could only see that this young girl's eyebrows were lively and elegant, like a cool breeze. Naturally, they would admire her. After all, everyone loved beauty. However, he didn't know how second young mistress Xiao grew up. 7 years had passed, but time didn't leave any traces of aging on her body. Looking at her appearance, there wasn't much difference from before, but there was a slight difference. It was probably that in the heroic spirit between her eyebrows, there was a hint of gentleness. This gentleness combined well with her straightforwardness. When she walked in the crowd, she was like a shining pearl that was difficult to ignore. Yin saw that there were people gathered in front of him. He took 2 steps forward and saw a vendor sitting in front of an iron pot. He skillfully scooped up the brown sugar in the pot and drew on the white stone slab. He immediately exclaimed happily, "It's a sugar figurine. Are there no sugar figurines in the Shuo capital?" Fourth concubine was curious as to why she was so excited. "There are, but they are not as beautiful as the ones made by the masters in Jiang City. There are also not so many types." Yin smiled and said, "Since I'm here, I'll buy one. I'll bring it back for Yao Yao to eat later." She said to fourth concubine, "There are too many people. Wait for me here. I'll come back once I'm done." Fourth concubine wanted to say something, but she saw that Yin had already pushed through the crowd and was heading towards the vendor who was buying the sugar figurines. Yin squeezed to the front and took out a string of copper coins. She said, "Little brother, I want a big tiger. Please make it look more impressive." "Okay." The vendor was very skillful. In just a moment, a big, impressive tiger was stuck on a bamboo stick. Yin handed over the money and took the sugar figurine with one hand. She looked very satisfied. Previously, Qing Mei had made a cloth tiger for Xiao Yao. Xiao Yao liked it very much. She hugged it when she ate and slept. Later, she accidentally left the cloth tiger in the brazier and burned it. Xiao Yao cried for half a day. Before Qing Mei finished making a new one, He Yin and the others had to set off for Jiang again. Xiao Yao liked tigers so much. She should be happy to see the tiger made of sugar. He Yin squeezed out of the crowd with the sugar tiger in her hand. Just as she was about to leave, she suddenly heard someone call her name from behind. The person seemed to be a little hesitant and uncertain. She said, "Ahi?" He Yin scratched her head and saw a man dressed in green standing not far from her. He looked surprised and complicated. "Chu, fourth young Master Chu. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.